Hello, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's debate entitled Sharia Law Negates Human Rights. My name is Robbie Yellen, and I'm President of the University College London Union Atheist, Secularist and Humanist Society. I'm very pleased to have the privilege of introducing our wonderful guests for this evening, and I would also like to apologise for the late start. There was a lecture in here before, and we had to clear them out. Right. Firstly, I would like to introduce the speakers for the motion. Our speakers for the motion are representing the organisation One Law for All, a British campaign group who advocate an end to the use and institutionalisation of Sharia and all religious laws, and to guarantee equal citizenship rights for all. Mariam Namazi is a rights activist, commentator and broadcaster, spokesperson of One Law for All and for Iran Solidarity. In 2005, she was named the National Secular Society's Secularist of the Year. Mariam is also Central Committee member of the Worker Communist Party of Iran and Vice President of the Gay and Lesbian Humanist Association. She is the co-author of Sharia Law in Britain, A Threat to One Law for All and Equal Rights. Second, we have Anne-Marie Waters over there. She is also a spokesperson of the One Law for All campaign. She is a law graduate with a keen interest in family law and human rights and the integration of the two. She is author of Apostasy and Asylum, a One Law for All production, and co-author of Sharia Law in Britain, A Threat to One Law for All and Human Rights. Now for the opposition. Both opponents to the motion are members of the... Oh, thank you. Both opponents to the motion are members of the Ahmadiyya denomination of Islam. For those of you unfamiliar with the specific branch of Islam, Ahmadiyya is an Islamic movement founded by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad in India near the end of the 19th century. Ahmadi Muslims view themselves as leading the revival and peaceful propagation of Islam. Ayaz Mahmood Khan is ex-head of the Ahmadiyya Muslim University of Theology and Languages and regular speaker on Muslim television Ahmadiyya in such programs as Beacon of Truth and Faith Matters. Taking over for Adam Walker, who could not make it this evening, is Jonathan Butterworth. Jonathan is a UCL teaching fellow, coordinator of human rights NGO Just Fair, and co-founder of our very own UCL student human rights program. Just Fair, in their own words, campaign for the realization of economic, social and cultural rights for everybody in the United Kingdom. I would finally also like to introduce Jacob Resser, sitting there in the middle. Jacob is a fourth-year medical student here at UCL who has very, very kindly offered to chair this evening's event. So, without further ado, I will pass you on to Jacob, who will begin the proceedings. Jacob.
Oh, thank you, Robbie. Good evening, everybody, and thank you all for coming to what I suspect will be a lively and invigorating debate. And may I extend a particularly warm welcome to our speakers who have taken time out of their presumably very busy schedules to be here this evening. Thank you. As I'm sure you're all aware, the motion for today's debate is that Sharia law negates human rights. This is a topic which has attracted a great deal of media attention recently, especially concerning the prospect of implementing the Sharia, or parts of it, into Western legal systems. This is obviously a particularly contentious aspect of the debate, and I am sure it will be discussed at some point during the evening. Before proceeding, however, I would like to emphasise that this is not a debate about whether Sharia should exist in some form or another in the UK. It is a debate regarding the nature of Sharia, the nature of human rights, and whether or not these two concepts are compatible or exclusive. Arguing that the Sharia does negate human rights, we have Mariam Namazi and Anne-Marie Waters. And arguing that it does not, we have Ayaz Mahmood Khan and Jonathan Butterworth. We shall first hear the arguments from our speakers before proceeding to a session of questions and answers from the floor. Each speaker will have no more than 20 minutes to put forward their argument. When 5 minutes remain, this shall be indicated by 3 taps of the agogo bell. A further 3 taps shall indicate when there is just 1 minute remaining. And if a speaker is still talking at the 20-minute mark, this will be indicated by the sound. And while 20 minutes is the maximum amount of time allowed, I would like to make it clear that there is no obligation to talk for that long. If you feel you can convey your argument well in 5, 10, or even 15 minutes, then please do not feel obliged to talk for longer. We will not be taking interjections during the presentations, so if you have any burning points to make or questions to ask, please save them for when the discussion is open to the floor. And at this point, does anybody have any questions? Doesn't look like it. Okay, and I know it sort of goes without saying, but just to remind you as well, if anyone has their phone on, if you could just please turn it off now or put it onto silent so we don't have any interruptions. Okay, well, with all of that established, we will now proceed to our first speaker of the proposition, Mariam Namazi.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here, I think. I'm not sure yet. I'm glad to see so many men interested in human rights and women's rights issues. But again, I hope that's the case, and that's why people are here, because I do think this is an important human rights and women's rights question. I do think you can't discuss the issue of Sharia law negating human rights without also talking about it being implemented in Britain and elsewhere, because there are clear examples of how it does negate human rights and violate human rights. From my perspective, I think the term Sharia law and human rights are antithetical to each other. They are contradictory, they oppose each other. If you use the term Sharia law and human rights in the same sentence, it's usually to say that human rights have been negated or violated. I think actually the implementation of Sharia law, whether it's in Britain, Iran, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, anywhere, is a human rights scandal of untold proportion, particularly given the fact that Sharia law is now the most widely implemented law worldwide, religious law worldwide. And given the rise of the political Islamic movement, we see very clearly its effects, its negative effects on human rights, on women's rights, and on just 21st century society and the world. Now, I think a lot of you will know that under Sharia's criminal code, you know, you've all heard of the sentences that are applicable under Sharia's criminal code. Anything from stoning to death for adultery, to executions for being gay, to executions for crime against morality and chastity, to flogging and imprisonment for improper veiling, and so on and so forth. In Iran, where I come from originally, there are 130 offenses that are punishable by death under Sharia law. So it includes blasphemy, apostasy, heresy, adultery, gay sex, and so on and so forth. And so I think it's brutal, it's medieval, it's barbaric. Not more so than any other religious law, because I think if we look at, you know, Christianity during the era of the Inquisition, you saw very many of the similar punishments against heretics and apostates and blasphemers and so on and so forth. Now, when we talk about Britain and the West generally, the implementation of Sharia law is not in the criminal aspects of Sharia, but it's in the family code. And as one human rights campaigner said very aptly, just because hands aren't being amputated, but women are being denied rights in the family, why is it less important and less urgent of a matter to address? Now, under Sharia's civil code, we know very clearly, for example, a woman's testimony is worth half that of a man's. Men have unilateral right to divorce, and you all know this, and women don't. For example, if you look at a statement made by the Islamic Sharia Council on their website about why a woman's testimony is worth half that of a man's, it says, if one forgets, the other can remind her. It's the difference between a man and a woman's brain. A woman's character is not so good for a case where testimony requires attention and concentration. Try concentrating, ladies, a bit while you're sitting here. It goes on to say that it's not derogatory, but it's the secret of women's nature. And you didn't know that you were going to learn about the secret of women's nature in discussing Sharia. And in a sense, that's why, according to the Sharia, men have unilateral rights to divorce, but women don't. Because again, according to the Islamic Sharia Council, women are governed by emotion, men by their minds. So he'll be thinking twice before uttering talaq or divorce. And of course, there are other examples, like girls getting half or women getting half of the inheritance of boys. And another important issue is the issue of child custody, where children go to the father at a preset age, irrespective of the welfare of the child. Now, mind you, the father might be the best person for the child, but under modern laws, civil laws, secular laws, child welfare is paramount, but not under Sharia law, where religious dogma is paramount, and the child goes to the father at a preset age, irrespective of the welfare of the child. Now, there's a lot of evidence that Sharia law is discriminatory. And it's not just, you know, us atheists saying it. I myself am an ex-Muslim, but a lot of Islamic organizations and women's rights organizations working with Muslim women, Muslim women's groups are saying it as well. For example, the Center for Islamic Pluralism, they did a study where they interviewed 90 Muslim women, and they found that a majority of the women who went to these Sharia courts were dissatisfied with the decisions that they received. There's a case of a 30-year-old who is from West Yorkshire, and she was forced into marriage at the age of 13. And she went to 3 different Sharia courts saying that she was forcibly married, asking the Sharia judge to allow her to get a divorce. And all 3 judges said that the marriage was valid. And she only managed to get a divorce at the age of 30 when her husband finally agreed to give her a divorce and said talaq 3 times. And of course, there are other examples too. You've got the Muslim Arbitration Tribunal here in Britain, which is dealing with various issues, including domestic violence. Don't forget that domestic violence is a crime in this country. It's a crime. But it's not necessarily seen that way by the Sharia courts. For example, Sheikh Maulana Abu Saeed, who's one of the Sharia judges, he said that marital rape, when there was a discussion about women who'd gone to, who had said that they had been raped by their husbands, he said marital rape isn't an aggression, because when you get married, sexual intercourse is part of the marriage. And he said, in fact, it's not marital rape that's the aggression. Calling it rape is a major aggression. I think that's scandalous. But there are no gasps in the audience. Well, we live, move and live on. Live and move on, yeah. Though there's ample evidence that it's discriminatory, and there are many studies to prove this, you keep hearing from proponents that there's not enough evidence. There's not enough evidence. There's never enough evidence to satisfy them to side with women and human rights as opposed to religion and religious courts. And I guess my argument is you don't need evidence, because even if there was not one black person living under racial apartheid in South Africa that said it was discriminatory, common sense tells you that racial apartheid is discriminatory. Common sense. And it's the same with Sharia law. When the law says that a woman's testimony is worth half that of a man's, it is discriminatory, even if you don't have any evidence, but there is already ample evidence. And the family code, you know, people keep talking about how it's not stonings and amputations, thank you very much. It's just, you know, family matters, divorce, marriage, child custody. But in fact, if you look at the situation of women in particular and children living under Sharia law in countries like Iran, Afghanistan, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, wherever, you'll see that, in fact, it's the family code, the civil code, that is one of the greatest pillars of women's oppression in those societies. And the fact that many of them have to remain in forced marriages, have to lose their children, forced marital rape, and so on and so forth. It's one of the big issues. It's not a trivial matter just because it has to do with rights in the family. There's an Algerian song I wanted to show you, and I'm sorry I couldn't get it to work on the DVD, but it's a song that Algerian women's rights activists put together to oppose 20 years of Sharia law in Algeria, in the family code. And I wanted to have you listen to this song because it shows women's protests and men protesting against the Sharia and the family code. And I want to read you some of the words of the song because I think they're very powerful. It says, "Justice is discredited when the scales are weighed. O people of Algeria, the truth is hidden. Women, let me tell you of 20 years of madness. In the Congress of Deceit of the year 1984, they got together and voted a law of oppression. They stole women's rights and parted, their minds at rest. They did what they pleased and took us for fools. What came over you, judge? Why are you so afraid of me?" And it goes on and talks about how our marriage is decided by men, we're forbidden to work, doors are closed to us, with the family code our wings are clipped. We're not asking for charity, we are entitled to justice. And it describes Sharia law in a way I think that describes it best. It says that Sharia law is a code of despair. It's a code obsessed with women. And I think that very aptly describes what it is. I know when discussing Sharia law, very often you hear people say, well, you know, if people want to go to these courts, it's their right to do so. You may not agree with it, you may not like it. And I think there's a couple of issues that are relevant here. One is that there's not a lot of choice involved for a lot of women. If you look at the few studies that exist in this area, there's one Muslim woman lawyer, law professor at the University of Reading. She sat in on 10 cases at the Sharia courts and found that out of the 10 cases, 4 women had civil injunctions against their husbands for violent and threatening behavior. So nonetheless, their husbands had dragged them into these courts to renegotiate decisions that were made in a British civil court. And there are women who say that 30, 40 years ago, they didn't need to go to Sharia courts. They do today. And I think one of the important points is that Sharia courts are a result, in my opinion, of the rise of the political Islamic movement. It's not that Muslims have become more devout. It's the demand and pressure of the political Islamic movement and Islamism in order to bring about these courts. And I think since in contemporary history, for example, Sharia courts in Britain came about in the mid-80s after the establishment of an Islamic regime in Iran and the rise of this movement. Now, I know that, you know, it's a difficult situation because you have the far right who also hijack the issue of Sharia law in order to promote their racist and anti-immigrant and inhuman agenda. And I actually think that the far right and Islamism are two sides of the same coin. They're both very much far right movements that are inhuman, violent, misogynist, homophobic, and belong not in this century, really. But I think that, in a sense, if good people don't speak out against Sharia law and Sharia courts, it leaves the space open for the far right to do that in its inhuman, in a way that attacks people. From my perspective, opposing Sharia law is a defense of Muslim women and a defense of human rights, even if there are people who say they choose to go to these courts. Because as I said before, the voluntary nature of these courts is questionable, given the pressures and intimidations that are involved, given the fact that many people didn't have to go to these courts 30, 40 years ago. They didn't exist in many countries as they do, and they do today. And also I think when you're dealing with laws that actually violate people's rights, it's the question of choice is very questionable. You know, if you look at, for example, there's a Oriental Studies Department in India. They did a study on sati, you know, the practice of women throwing themselves on the burning pyres of their husbands. And they said that in the study that they did, there were 40 eyewitness accounts of women throwing themselves on the burning pyres, and only 2 of the cases were involuntary. The rest of the cases were voluntary. The women chose to throw themselves on the burning pyres of their husbands, and therefore it's acceptable. And I think we need to look at the pressures and intimidations that are involved that make it seem as if Sharia law and courts are acceptable when in fact they're not. They shouldn't be accepted in any way, shape, and form. I guess I want to end by saying a few things. I think opposing Sharia courts and saying that Sharia courts are a violation of human rights is not an attack on Muslims. And I think this needs to be very clear. The example I always give is, I don't like FGM. I oppose female genital mutilation. It's not an attack on girls and women who've been mutilated. I don't like poverty. It's not an attack on people who are poor. And in a sense, attacking that which is discriminatory, misogynist, homophobic, unfair in its civil code, and truly barbaric and medieval in its penal code, is a defense of people's rights and a defense of 21st century values and norms. It's also not necessarily anti-Islam. I myself am against religion. I think religions are equal and equally bad, in my opinion. But I don't think necessarily an attack on Sharia law and Sharia courts is an attack on Islam, because people obviously have the right to believe anything they want, in the same way that I have a right to believe in anything I want. But having Sharia courts is a very different matter. It's a very different matter, and I think it's linked to the rise of Islamism, and fighting Islamism is something that actually Muslims and people living in the Middle East, in North Africa, and under Islamic rule have been at the forefront of battling, and Muslims have often been the first victims of Sharia law and Islamism. I don't think it's a question of being tolerant and being anti-racist to defend Sharia courts. I think it's quite the opposite. The very idea of difference is the fundamental basis of a racist agenda. It's not the other way around, not the other way around. Saying that different people deserve to have different rights because of where they come from, because of their religious beliefs, is very racist in my opinion, and it's something that has to be opposed. From my perspective, Sharia law is the same as saying human rights violations, in my opinion. It violates rights, left, right, and center. I know people will say that, you know, this is not Sharia law, but the reality is that Sharia law is being implemented in many countries across the world. And we see what it represents day in and day out. If you don't like Iran because it's Shia, that's what I often hear, well, look at the situation in Saudi Arabia. If you don't like Saudi Arabia, you don't think that's real Islam, well, look at what's happening in Afghanistan. You don't think Afghanistan is real Islam, well, then look at what's happening in Iraq. There's always an excuse for why this is not proper Islam, and that's fine. I believe that there are a lot of people who are Muslims, including my parents, who are wonderful people who respect human rights and whose lives are not antithetical to human rights. But that's not the same as saying that Sharia law is, you know, one and the same with respecting human rights. It's not. It's a difference between people and a legal court and laws that are actually part and parcel of the political Islamic movement's attempts at restricting and limiting and negating rights, not the other way around. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mariam. I would now like to invite our first speaker against the motion to present their arguments, Ayaz Mahmood Khan.
Do I use this mic? This one is enough? Okay. Well, the more the merrier. Ladies and gentlemen, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon you all. Today, I will speak against the motion that Sharia law negates human rights. However, before I begin, I have some very good news for human rights activists throughout the world, including Mariam and Anne-Marie. My dear friends, all these years which you have understood to be Sharia law has no relationship whatsoever with the religion of Islam or Sharia. Indeed, the Sharia law is, as presented by Mariam and Anne-Marie and others like them, is not Sharia law at all. In fact, Sharia law does not promote human rights injustices or misogyny. Rather, it stands to protect the weaker segments of society, and like a solid fortress, has been erected to shield humanity from the swords and spears of injustice. There is no doubt that Sharia law has and still is being used throughout the world in so-called Muslim states to perpetrate grave injustices against society. But I would like to clarify right from the outset that the actions of Iran or Afghanistan, for example, cannot be attributed to Islam or Sharia. Moreover, the statements and verdicts of the Islamic Sharia Council and other judges and imams, which are often quoted by Maryam and Anne-Marie, and upon which they primarily base their arguments against Sharia, are not an authentic representation of Islam, or a fundamental source by which the Sharia can be analyzed and judged, especially when no such teachings are found in the original scripture to that effect. Contrary to the commonly held belief, and as Maryam stated in one of her recent debates at the House of Commons, Islamic jurisprudence is not an authentic source either, because there are many different schools of thought, all of which interpret the Holy Qur'an, Sunnah, and Ahadith differently. Therefore, when Maryam and Anne-Marie speak of Sharia law, which Sharia law are they referring to? The Sharia law of the Hanafis or of the Shafi'is? Perhaps the Hanbalis or maybe the Ithna Asharis? Hence, when there are so many varying schools of thought, all of which propose their own interpretations, how do we truly determine the essence of Sharia? Sharia law is primarily based on the Holy Qur'an. The Holy Qur'an is not only a holy scripture which teaches humankind how to develop a living relationship with God, but it is a way of life. It is a code of conduct. It works towards nurturing and cultivating a society of peace and harmony, irrespective of religion and race. This is because it contains a universal teaching which is based on principles of human rights, by which all people, irrespective of their persuasions, can live together in one global society and one family, that is, the family of humanity. Therefore, those fundamental principles of human rights, as taught in the Holy Qur'an, are but another name for Sharia law, and these are applicable to all people. Then comes the Sunnah, which is the practice of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and then comes the Ahadith, which are the sayings of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him. As such, these are the three sources by which a person may judge the Islamic Sharia. Anything beyond this does not hold any value, because if tomorrow somebody stands up in the name of Islam and says that Islam promotes genocide, does this automatically mean that Islam actually teaches this? Of course not. Therefore, Maryam and Anne-Marie owe Islam at least this much courtesy, that before they pass a statement on Islam, they should closely study these three sources, and not base their arguments on the actions of so-called Muslim states who claim that they are practicing the Sharia, and launch a human rights campaign against it, an entire human rights campaign against it, and asserting that Islam teaches misogyny. Because I trust that the academic integrity of such good people as Maryam and Anne-Marie compels them at least to first study the Holy Qur'an from beginning to end. For if they had truly studied the Holy Qur'an in its entirety, they would have surely discovered that all of the objections they level against the Sharia are nowhere to be found in the Holy Qur'an. The Holy Qur'an is replete of injunctions which promote human rights. It promotes human values and affords humankind dignity and honor which the West only recently gave to its citizens. It is ironic that Maryam and Anne-Marie referred to Islam as a misogynistic religion, but Islam afforded rights to women 14 centuries ago, which the West has only granted in the last century or two. So let's get our perspective straight right from the outset. Now, Maryam and Anne-Marie often present various examples of human rights violations which apparently the Sharia condones, and I would like to briefly take these up one by one. Firstly, it is alleged that the Sharia promotes stoning to death for apostasy, for blasphemy and adultery, and the hanging of homosexuals and this kind of stuff. This is a complete misstatement of the facts. There is not a single verse in the Holy Qur'an where the punishment of stoning has been prescribed for any crime whatsoever, nor is such a punishment prescribed for homosexuals either. With relation to a woman's testimony being half, once again, absolutely false. I challenge my two good speakers to find me a single verse which states that a woman's testimony is worth half of a man's. Rather, the Holy Qur'an clearly states that a woman's testimony is equal to that of a man in chapter 24 of the Holy Qur'an. Now, as far as chapter 2, verse 283 is concerned, which is misconstrued to imply this false notion, If Miriam and Anne-Marie had read that verse fully, they would know that only specifically matters of finance are mentioned, that if two men cannot be found as witnesses, then one woman and two women should be called upon, so that if the first forgets, the other may remind her. Now, this is a conditional statement. If the first forgets, the other may remind her. This is a conditional clause. This verse does not command that two women must testify in order for the testimony to be accepted. So if the first woman does not forget, then the second part of the clause automatically ceases in its application, and the second woman's testimony is not required. This verse does not state that a woman will forget because her memory is deficient or because, quote, a woman's character is not so good when concentration and attention is required, as the Islamic Sharia Council unfortunately states, and these are one of Miriam's favorite quotes, by the way. Rather, many women are far more capable than men. No, there's no reason to laugh. This provision to women is only in matters of finance, nothing else. The reason being that in the past, women were not involved in matters of finance, and anyone, be it a man or a woman, if required to recall intricate details in an area which they are not too familiar with, can easily forget, and I include myself. Only recently did women begin to play an active role in finances. Now, Anne-Marie asserted once in a debate in the House of Commons that a woman's testimony is worth half in family law. Absolutely incorrect. There is a clear example in the Ahadith where the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, accepted the sole testimony of a single lady in an issue specifically relating to family law. Then, at another occasion, the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, had a man punished for raping a poor woman in Medina, merely on the basis of the victim's sole testimony. And this hadith also clarifies the issue often presented in the media that rape victims are forced to prison in so-called Muslim states and then compelled to marry their offenders. This is absolute ignorance. It is barbarity, it is injustice, and has nothing to do with the religion of Islam or the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him. Then, it is alleged that Sharia allows forced marriages. Once again, wrong. The Holy Qur'an clearly states, O ye who believe, it is not lawful for you to inherit women against their will. Chapter 4, verse 20. Moreover, there is a hadith which states that the consent of the bride is absolutely necessary in a marriage. And at one occasion, when a girl was forced into a marriage by her father, the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, issued a separation order as per the wish of the girl immediately. Then, it is alleged that Sharia permits men to unilaterally divorce their wives, but women have to beg an imam for their freedom or present justifications which are most often hard to prove. Yet again, absolutely false. Once a lady came to the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and said that, I wish to divorce my husband merely because I don't feel inclined to him. And the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, immediately issued a verdict of separation. Who says that a woman has to beg an imam? Who says that she must provide justifications? The mere fact that she desires a separation is enough. This is her right in Islam. In the UK, women were not permitted to divorce until the 1800s, and even then in limited circumstances. Now comes the issue of a woman's inheritance. It is asserted that in the Sharia law, a woman receives half the share of inheritance as compared to men. Before I answer this, I ask, when was it that women in the West were permitted to inherit wealth at all? Islam endowed this right to women 14 centuries ago, light years ahead any modern law. Islam permitted women to own property and inherit wealth in a time when women themselves were inherited by men against their will. And today, modern thinkers raise objections against Islam that the Sharia does not give women rights in this respect. What a grave injustice is this? The reason men receive a double share is because they are legally made responsible by the Holy Qur'an to provide for the women and children. The wife receives a dowry from the husband, which she has the right to spend solely on herself. She can choose to work and not spend a penny on the family. She might have a bank balance of millions of pounds, but the husband has no right in Islam to demand that she spend that wealth on family maintenance. This responsibility is solely placed on the shoulders of men. Therefore, men's share of inheritance is not greater than women due to discrimination. It is greater due to the proportionally greater financial responsibility which has been placed on men by the Sharia. The husband receives an extra portion of inheritance, but my friends, practically the wife receives that anyways, because the husband is expected to spend out of that wealth on the women and children. So now I ask, is this a law which discriminates against women, or is it a law which guarantees the financial stability of women first and then men? Then it is alleged that Islam does not permit women to acquire an education. Once again, false. In the Holy Qur'an, where God teaches humankind to pray for an increase in their knowledge, no distinction has been made between man and woman. Perhaps Miriam and Anne-Marie, our friends, overlooked the hadith where the Holy Prophet says that the acquisition of knowledge is compulsory upon every Muslim man and Muslim woman. It seems they also missed the hadith where the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, said that you should learn half of your wealth from my wife, half of your knowledge from my wife Aisha. So not only does Islam promote education for women, it also promotes that they should actively teach it to others. Then, it is falsely asserted that the Holy Qur'an legalizes domestic violence. How very wrong indeed. Nowhere in the Holy Qur'an has God taught that men should abuse their wives. Quite the contrary, the Holy Qur'an states, cohabit with your wives in kindness, chapter 4, verse 20. Then God states, your wives are a garment for you and you are a garment for them. Chapter 2, verse 188. So just as a garment protects us and covers our weaknesses, so too should a husband and wife protect each other. Then the Holy Prophet said, the best of you are the ones who are best in the treatment of their wives, and I am the best in the treatment of my wives. And then he said, do not beat them, do not revile them. And then he said that women are like glass. They should be handled softly and with care. And practically, the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, never once raised his pinky finger against any one of his wives. Then it is alleged that Islam allows marital rape, and that a husband automatically receives child custody despite it being in the best interest of the child. This is also false and has no basis in any original Islamic text. So my friends, Sharia law is not at all misogynistic or barbaric. I have presented examples from the authentic sources of Islam which establish that the objections which have been attributed to Islam by our good speakers are incorrect. However, the question which naturally comes to my mind is that in light of these very clear-cut statements and facts, why have these objections been raised by our friends? Is it a blatant misstatement of the facts, or perhaps a lack of study? As Islam teaches, I give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they just didn't know. However, let's put the Sharia to one side, just for a moment. I've often heard the argument that even if the Sharia law is being misused, the fact remains that ultimately Sharia law is a means by which human rights atrocities are being committed. Therefore, it should be done away with. However, this logic is flawed because secular laws have been equally misused in the past. Two of the most destructive wars in the history of mankind were geopolitical wars, not religious, World War I and World War II, with over 15 million and 60 million deaths, respectively. Then, China and the USSR, which were two famous atheist states of that time, continued mass brutality and persecution with over 50 million deaths. Miriam states that even once I heard her in a debate that in the 21st century, we still have stonings. But my dear friends, in the 21st century, we still have torture camps which are run by democratic states as well. So does this mean that this is a representation of atheism or democratic values? Of course not. Just how this cannot be a representation of democratic values or atheism, so too the unjust actions of Muslim states cannot be a true representation of Sharia. So any system, be it religious or non-religious, can be used to perpetrate atrocities. If a drunk driver crashes a car into an innocent person and kills him, we don't blame the car, we blame the driver. But who says that Islam is not compatible with liberal democracy and pluralist societies? The fact is that an Islamic government is actually a secular government. Now, this may surprise some people, but I can prove it, because the reason being that secularism is found on the basis of absolute justice, which is enjoyed by all peoples, irrespective of background or faith. This is exactly what the Holy Qur'an teaches as well, that there is no compulsion in religion. If Islam permitted for religious law to be imposed by force, this would be an injustice upon those non-Muslims who do not believe in the Islamic law, or even upon Muslims of different sects who do not wish to follow that law. This is why when the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, was unanimously elected as the political leader of Medina, which was a society comprising of Jews, Muslims, and pagans, he would always ask whether the disputant parties would like to be judged according to the law of Islam, the law of the Torah, or merely by arbitration. This, my friends, is the pinnacle of absolute justice, where history shows that a Jew could file a complaint against a Muslim and justice would be served by the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him. There seems to be a fear that criminal law can be imposed by force, for example, regarding punishments of stealing. And these are generally matters of legislation that the state has a right to control. Hazrat Mirza Tahir Ahmad, may Allah be pleased with him, who is the fourth successor of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, states, and I quote, "Religion does not need to be the predominant legislative authority in the political affairs of a state." And he aptly points out that if this were permitted, then all religions would have the right to impose their religious laws on non-believers, and this is unjust. By the grace of God, we have a wonderful legal system in the UK, founded on principles of absolute justice. This country has become a safe haven for all people of all faiths. Why do we need to change a perfectly good functioning legal system? As I have already mentioned, and I repeat again, any secular law, including the UK, founded on principles of absolute justice are but another name for Sharia law. And it is precisely for this reason that in a true Islamic state, every citizen, irrespective of religion, is equally deserving of human rights. Even a non-Muslim can be elected as head of state. In the end, I would like to say that many may think that the Islam I have presented today is different than what seems to be prevalent throughout the world. I have presented today that picture of Islam which was presented by the holy founder of our community, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad of Qadian. This is not a new Islam, but the very same Islam which was brought by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam 14 centuries ago, who was a valiant general of human rights. If we wish to change the world for the better, we must join together to defend the world from those people who are responsible for destroying the peace. Raising vile objections against a religion which is being hijacked and drawing cartoons which hurt the sensitivities of billions of people will not do the world any good in establishing peace. It will only increase tensions and create gaps between different people. But today, the world needs bridges, not gaps. It needs the good people of all the world to unite to defend the world from a common enemy, the enemy of injustice, inequity, misunderstanding, and intolerance. It is this human rights campaign which we invite you to join us in. This is true Islam. May Allah richly bless you all.
Thank you, Ayaz.
Thank you very much.
And now, in favour of the motion once more, Anne-Marie Waters.
Hello, is this on? Can you hear me? Hello. I would just like to thank the last speaker for his very interesting talk. I would say, however, that his argument seems to be more with the government of Saudi Arabia, the government of Iran, government of Afghanistan, the government of several other countries. He says this isn't true Sharia, they seem to think it is. So I would suggest that the argument is with them rather than with us. I would also suggest that Sharia is as Sharia does. Sitting here and talking about what was said 1400 years ago isn't really an argument against what is happening today under Sharia law in various countries around the world and right here in Britain. When the advertisement for this evening appeared on Mariam's blog, somebody wrote under it, is this even a debate? And I would say, no, it isn't, because it is actually, and I'll back this up in a minute, it is actually a matter of fact that Sharia law negates human rights. The only question to be answered is whether that matters and whether or not human rights apply to women. An American feminist wrote a brilliant book, Catherine McKinnon, called Are Women Human? And in it, she argued that human rights laws internationally do not apply to women in practice. And I would agree that she has made a very strong argument there. Look, Mariam has given a very passionate sort of moral argument for this against Sharia law. I'm going to give a legal one. And I'm going to back up what I said, that it is a matter of fact that Sharia law negates human rights. Human rights are not a concept, they are not a dream, they are a legal reality. They are written down in international law, European law and domestic UK law. They're not a concept, they are a reality. We can look at them, we can objectively study them, we can see them. They exist. They started with the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights after World War II. A few decades later came the European Convention on Human Rights, and from that the British government brought the European Convention on Human Rights into British law by virtue of the Human Rights Act in 1998. And I won't go through all human rights because it would take too long, but I'm just going to go through some of the ones that were relevant. I'll tell you what the human right is as written in law. In other words, it's not a concept, it's not a fantasy, it exists, it's a reality, we can see it and study it. These are rights, and then I'll tell you how Sharia negates them. I'll first look at the European Convention on Human Rights, and I'll apply this one to Sharia, the practice of Sharia in Britain, because the European Convention on Human Rights is a part of British law by virtue of the Human Rights Act. Now, Article 5 of the European Convention on Human Rights states very clearly, everyone has the right to liberty and security of person. Now, the Islamic Sharia Council, which operates most Sharia courts in this country, on its website, and I'm sure my friend will argue that this is not real Sharia, they seem to think it is, so I suggest you take it up with them. A fatwa issued on their website to a woman who had written in to say she wants to pray, but she wants to pray away from the home. She wants to pray by herself. This is how she's always done it, and she would like to continue doing it. The response from the Islamic Sharia Council was, and I quote, "You need to make sure that you are not absent from him without his permission." So much for her right to liberty. The Muslim Arbitration Tribunal, which is runs the another branch of Sharia courts in this country, has dealt with cases of domestic violence, and it openly acknowledges this. It says so in national newspapers, so comfortable do they feel. It deals with cases of domestic violence, and it told, I think, the Independent newspaper that Sharia judges in the Muslim Arbitration Tribunal ordered husbands who had been beating their wives, I mean, it wasn't even up for debate, ordered husbands to take anger management classes and mentoring from community elders. There was no further punishment. Doesn't exactly chime with her right to security of person. Mariam has already alluded to the rape issue, the marital rape issue. Again, not in tune with her right to liberty and security of person, the fact that she is not allowed to refuse sex. Another Sharia Council judge, Hatem al-Haddad, said, and I quote, with regard to domestic violence, "A man should not be questioned as to why he beats his wife. This is not conducive to a woman's right to liberty and security of person, which is guaranteed to her under the Human Rights Act of this country." Article 6 of the European Convention on Human Rights. I'll read it to you. In the determination of his civil rights, always his, in the determination of his civil rights and obligations or any criminal charge against him, everyone is entitled to a fair and public hearing within a reasonable time by an independent and impartial tribunal established by law. The words that are most relevant there are fair and impartial. As Mariam has already said, a woman's testimony is worth half of a man's in Sharia. The Islamic Sharia Council and the Muslim Arbitration Tribunal both practice this. And if my friend on my left, again, believes this is not real Sharia, I suggest you take it up with them because they seem to believe that this is real Sharia. So a woman's testimony is worth half. In practice, this means she must provide a witness or some sort of evidence to back up her assertions, or else her husband is believed automatically. A Sharia court told a newspaper a few years ago that when women were filing for divorce, the cost of her to file was £250, whereas for a man it was only £100. And a woman's has to be more expensive because, and I quote, "a woman's word must be corroborated." Now, this is not in tune with her right to a fair and impartial hearing, as guaranteed to her by the European Convention on Human Rights and the Human Rights Act. It is completely ignores her human rights on this. I'm going to turn to the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, which under Article 1, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. A marriage contract under Sharia is made between a husband and a father. And this is a practice in most countries that practice Sharia. And I'm going to keep repeating this. If my friend thinks this is not real Sharia, he'll need to take it up with them. A woman has no right to divorce, as Mariam has already alluded to. So this is not in keeping with the concept, Article 1 of an internationally binding human rights document, that all human beings are born equal in dignity and rights. In Sharia, they are clearly not. How obvious does it have to be? Article 4 of the UN Declaration on Human Rights. No one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Now, across the Sharia-dominated world, young girls are sold into marriage, given into marriage, handed over in settlement of debts, to a life of sexual and domestic slavery. Now, this issue was brought up in Yemen not that many years ago. A challenge to the marriage of young children as young as 9, was made. And it was dismissed, by parliamentarians, or the equivalent in Yemen. And the quote was, and Yemen, by the way, is a country governed by Sharia law. There, at least they say it's Sharia law. The quote in opposition, and the law was upheld, children are still allowed to be married in Yemen. The quote, because this happened to the Prophet, we cannot tell people that it is prohibited to marry at a young age. Yemen's constitution declares Islam as a state religion, and its state law is Sharia. Article 5 of the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights. No one shall be subjected to torture or cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. In Afghanistan, thousands upon thousands of women are in prison because they were raped. It is Sharia law that they use. Again, it's their Sharia law. And I suggest if you don't like it, take it up with them. They think it's Sharia. I'm willing to take their word for it. Cruel or inhuman punishment. Adultery in Iran. A woman found guilty of adultery, she must provide, if a woman alleges rape in Iran, she must provide 4 male Muslim witnesses, or she can find herself charged with adultery and find herself buried to her chest in the ground, while a group of heroic men throw stones at her head until she dies. Now, I don't know whether you would consider that a cruel and inhuman and degrading punishment. I certainly would. And this Sharia is completely at odds with her right to live without these punishments. Article 7, all are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. Now, we've gone through this several times. A woman's testimony is worth half. She has no divorce rights. She has no child custody rights. She is most certainly not equal before the law, the Sharia law. And Article 18, a very interesting one. Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. In almost every country governed by Sharia law, insulting Islam carries some sort of criminal penalty. Many countries impose the death penalty for apostasy, for leaving Islam, for questioning Islam. So again, these are Sharia law states, and if you don't believe it, take it up with them. They say they're Sharia. And who am I to argue? So it's, again, I started by saying it is a matter of fact that Sharia law negates human rights. I have read you the laws, and I have read you the examples of how Sharia law negates human rights. My question to you is quite simply this. Does it matter that Sharia law negates human rights? Does it matter to you? It certainly matters to me. I would argue that human rights are all we've got, and human beings are all we've got. And I would also ask you to consider, because the debate is the debate on what we're being asked to debate tonight is one, as far as I'm concerned. The questions are whether it matters and whether or not human rights laws apply to women. And if they do, then we have got to get rid of Sharia. We've got to get rid of it here, and we've got to get rid of it everywhere else, because it tramples upon the rights of women. That is a matter of fact. So it's up to you to decide whether you think that is important and whether or not you think women should be protected by the human rights I've read out to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. And now for our final speaker, arguing against the motion, Jonathan Butterworth.
Before we start, can I move in a little bit somehow?
Yeah, sure. Whenever you're ready.
I feel like we're talking past each other to some degree. How is it that I can agree with Iyaz and agree with Anne-Marie and agree with Mariam at the same time? On so many points that Mariam and Anne-Marie have raised, I think so many people in this room will feel horrified. It does on a human level. You can't accept somebody being stoned, maritally raped, denied divorce. The punishments that we've talked about and the treatment and the ideas are disgusting. I think nearly everybody in this room would agree with it. And in terms of whose job is it to sort this out, well, I think it's everybody's job, isn't it? It's not just our job to go to Saudi Arabia, because if we go to Saudi Arabia, they're going to ignore us just as much as if another person goes. I think as a community, we need to fight for these rights. It's not any one individual's job or another individual's, it's everybody's together. We have to fight for human rights, we have to fight for freedom, we have to fight for humanity together. And that's what we want to do. That's what we want to try and do. So I'm not going to talk about the disgusting forms of Sharia that we have before us today. They horrify me. They nearly prevented me from coming to Islam. I wasn't born Muslim. It's a much more recent thing. I don't want to use up all my time. I'd like to talk about this more afterwards, but I don't want to end short, because then you guys will feel hard done by and I'll feel terrible. But I agree on so many points. Who wouldn't? It's disgusting. No doubt about it. But is it true Sharia? And the answer is no. It's just not true Sharia. I know you're shaking your head already, but let me try and prove it to you. Okay, so I've got two main points I want to make. So, ladies and gentlemen, does Sharia law negate human rights? No, for two reasons. Firstly, freedom. Freedom is the basis of human rights and of Islam. They both secure freedom of every human being. Gotta get some water. Secondly, universal human rights. Islam guarantees universal human rights. In particular, all of the ones mentioned by my friend Anne-Marie, but not only them, not only those from the, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the ECHR, but also those protected by the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. These are the rights to food, the rights to water, the right to housing, to healthcare, to social security, adequate employment, participation in cultural rights. These are the jobs, these are the rights that I spend every day of my life trying to protect here in the UK. So it does. But not only this, it's universal. I mean it genuinely universal. So it protects the rights of groups as well, of most at-risk groups who are so easily abused, particularly by men who are on a power trip. So we as men need to take a lot of responsibility for this. It's up to us to prevent other men from abusing vulnerable sections of the population, such as women, children, older people, disabled people, and ethnic minorities, racial discrimination. So these are a bunch of conventions which I've just mentioned, and I'll come through them. There's CEDAW, Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, all forms of discrimination against women. So a whole category of these. So there's two main points. Let me start with freedom. Freedom's the basis of human rights and Islam. Human rights were not founded, but very much influenced by J.S. Mill. You will have all heard of J.S. Mill, his theories of liberty, yeah? So Mill beautifully stated that the only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. So this is central to human rights. In essence, everybody is free to think, speak and act in any way they choose as long as they do not harm others. Similarly, Islam abhors compulsion, but it adores freedom. Really? Is that true? Surely not. We've heard quite to the contrary. But let me try and prove it. This is powerfully stated at chapter 2, verse 257 of the Qur'an. In the name of God, the gracious, the merciful, it says, there is no compulsion in religion. That principle is central to Islam. There's no way around it. Any compulsion, it's not Islam. If it's freedom, it's Islam. Or at the very least, if it's compulsion, it's not. Islam's all about choice. We can choose to believe in God or not to believe, to embrace God's messengers or not to embrace them, to pray or not to pray, to fast or not to fast, to give charity or not to give charity, to go on a pilgrimage or not to go on a pilgrimage. But at its centre, it's all about choice. But how does this impact on a given state, the law of a given state? Well, quite simply, as my brother Riaz has just told us, it's secularism. This was the practice of the Holy Prophet, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him. Following his example, Sharia law would have to give every individual that comes to them the choice. Do you want to be judged by Islamic law? Do you want to be judged by the Torah? Do you want to be judged by the Gospel? Or do you want to be judged by an atheist law? But it's a secular state, essentially. Let me turn to point 2. Islam guarantees fundamental human rights. So I'm not talking about dodgy Sharia, disgusting Sharia, the Sharia that's all of our responsibility to deal with before it destroys all of us. But I'm talking about true Sharia. That's the only Sharia that I care about, that matters to me. So, as stated, well, these rights, they cover all of the different rights. They cover civil and political, economic and social, and all the groups. But it's not just the rights, it's the principles that determines the rights. Because this, as we all know, is how you interpret human rights. You go to the principles, don't you? So what are the principles? They're exactly the same as the principles in the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. It's dignity, it's freedom, it's equality, it's respect, it's peace, democratic governance, justice, kindness, and kinship. These are the principles of Islam and of human rights. But can this really be true? So let me try and give you a few examples of the law and the practice of the Quran and of the practice of the Holy Prophet, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him. Let me start with civil and political rights. Article 5, the right to liberty and security of the person, and Article 3, freedom from inhuman and degrading treatment. So firstly, the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of God be upon him, famously declared that, O people, surely your blood, your property, and your honour are as sacred and inviolable as the sanctity and inviolability of this day. This was the day of the pilgrimage. But how did he protect these rights in his everyday life? Well, let me tell you a story. Once there was a Bedouin that came into the mosque in Medina, and the Bedouin, he was not aware necessarily of the rules of cleanliness within Islam, so he urinated within the mosque. So the companions of the Holy Prophet, may Allah be pleased with him, ran towards the companion in order to beat him. But the Holy Prophet, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him, stopped them and said, no, wait, and let him finish. Let him finish urinating in this mosque. Then, after he had finished, he said, get me a bucket of water. They brought the bucket of water, he took the water, he cleaned the urine from the floor himself. And then he said to them, I quote, you were not raised by God to cause difficulties for people. Always remember that you were raised to bring relief to mankind. Think deeply on what that means and how we would take that now to apply to Sharia now. Very differently to what the disgraceful things that are happening around the world, which I fully agree with Anne-Marie and Mariam on, and so does my brother Riaz. But this is just one of countless examples of how true Sharia protects the rights to liberty and security of the person and freedom from inhuman and degrading treatment. What about Article 2, the right to life? Article 10, freedom of expression, and Article 11, freedom of association. How are these protected by the Sharia? Well, let's go to the source itself, the Holy Qur'an. At chapter 5, verse 3:3, it says, in the name of God, the gracious, the merciful, whosoever killed a person, unless it be for killing another person or creating disorder in the land, it shall be as if he had killed all of mankind. That's the sanctity of human life within Islam. The Quran also safeguards the right to freedom of association and expression. Again, chapter 5, verse 3, it says, in the name of God, the gracious, the merciful, cooperate with one another in the promotion of virtue and beneficence, but cooperate not with one another in sin and transgression. But how did the Holy Prophet, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him, guarantee the rights to life, expression and assembly in his life? We want to know about law and practice. So throughout the Prophet's lifetime, people insulted him, defamed him, abused him continually. He was continually a victim of this. But how did he respond? Well, let's take an example. There was one individual, Abdullah Salul, and after numerous insults, he put the threat to him that he was going to essentially depose him and remove him from his role as the democratically chosen governor of Medina. How did the Holy Prophet respond to this? Well, Abdullah's son, came up to the Holy Prophet and he said, "Holy Prophet, let me please kill this man for you, for he has done you a great disservice with the continual abuse he has given to you." What did the Holy Prophet, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him, how did he respond? He responded by saying, "No, there is nothing to be done. Your father will not be punished by anyone." This is how Sharia safeguards the rights to liberty, security of the person, the rights to, I've already said liberty, inhuman and degrading treatment. This is how Articles 3 and Article 5 are protected. Turning now to economic, social and cultural rights, the work I try to do for a living. How does the true Sharia safeguard Article 11, the right to an adequate standard of living? Well, the Qur'an itself, quite miraculously, imposes the economic obligation of zakat. This is, on every Muslim, 2.5% of their wealth in charity. And this is spent directly to secure the economic, social and cultural rights of the most vulnerable in that society. Is this true, really? Well, yes, it is. Chapter 9, verse 60 of the Qur'an says, "Zakat expenditures are only for the poor and for the needy, and for those employed to collect the zakat, and for bringing hearts together, and for freeing slaves, and for those in debt, and for the cause of God, and for the traveller. An obligation from God." But is it a right as well? Well, yes, it is. Chapter 51, verse 20, says that the Quran takes an explicit, it does take an explicit human rights-based approach. What does it say? It says that zakat, in their wealth, they acknowledge the right of those who ask for help and those who could not. There's the duty, there's the right. That's Article 11 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Not only on a state, but on every individual in society, vertical and horizontal, something we've never managed to achieve and which we fail at miserably. This takes it beyond the state and puts it on every one of us, because it's every one of our obligations to secure human rights. That's the culture of human rights. What about women's rights as protected under the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, also known as CEDAW? So, this is most important for us. This is where they're being abused the most at the moment, is it not? And agreeing with you in entirety in that. The Quran, it states at chapter 2, verse 229, Surah Al-Baqarah, it provides a stunning declaration. It says, "In the name of God, the gracious, the merciful, and they, the women, have rights similar to those of men over them in equity. But men have a degree over them in their responsibilities." What does this mean? Well, in essence, equal rights for men and women, but greater duties for men. If the Sharia were to be applied properly, it would be the men who would be complaining, arguably. Bit tongue-in-cheek, but I would suggest so. But it's not. It's not. It is being abused and people are suffering terribly. Let's not discredit from that truth. And how does the Sharia promote the equal rights of women? Well, we're told that, this is again the words of the Holy Prophet, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him. He outlined the principle of equality and non-discrimination. He said, "A person who is blessed with a daughter or daughters and makes no discrimination between them and his sons and brings them up with kindness and affection will be as close to me in paradise as my forefinger and my middle finger are to each other." No discrimination. No discrimination against young girls, against women entirely. Again, this shows how Sharia safeguards the rights of women in law and in practice, something we struggle to do here terribly in the UK. Finally, children's rights. Are children's rights comprehensively secured by the Sharia, and do they mirror the protections found in the UN Conventions on the Rights of the Child? Yes. Yes, they do. Chapter 4, verse 10 of the Quran commands that those who deal with minors must, in the name of God, the gracious and merciful, have the same care in their minds as they would wish for their own little ones if they were to leave them behind. And the Holy Prophet, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him, he also told us that the best among you is he who treats his family best. What does this mean in practice? Well, Osama bin Zaid, may Allah be pleased with him, narrates that while he was a child, he was picked up by the Holy Prophet, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him, and put on one of his knees. Then the Holy Prophet took his other grandchild, Hassan, may Allah be pleased with him, on his other knee. He embraced them both and prayed to God, "O my Lord, show mercy to them as I am showing mercy to them." This incident left an indelible mark on Osama, to the extent that when he reported it, he would cry. This is the care and the love that is secured by Sharia for the rights of the child. True Sharia, I should add. True Sharia. Not the Sharia we have today. That is all of our duty to deal with. And I commend One Law for All for dealing with it to this extent, to a great extent. But it's not true Sharia. It's that simple. Let me conclude. Was that 1 minute or 5?
5 minutes.
Slowly. This is with, pardon me, got carried away there. So essentially in conclusion, I've got 2 points that I want to make. Freedom and universal rights. Firstly, freedom. The philosophical premise of Islam and human rights is the same. True Islam, not the Islam that we are all looking to move beyond. Nobody wants the forms of Islam that are practiced in the worst elements of our humanity. We don't want it. But the true Islam that I'm seeking, it is freedom to live your life as you wish to live it, as long as you do not harm others. This is the central principle of Islam. Coincidentally, this is the central principle of human rights. This is J.S. Mill's theory on liberty. So for the last 200 years, this has been the main theory underpinning human rights. For the last 1400 years, this has been the main theory underpinning Islam. This is freedom. Secondly, universal human rights. Both international human rights and Islam seek to protect a complete range of universal rights for all. It's that simple. True Islam looks to protect human rights, and if it isn't protecting human rights properly, in my humble opinion, it isn't true Islam. And if it's not a true Islam, then let us all work together to seek true Islam. But we can't ignore it. We cannot say, oh, this isn't Islam, it's not my problem, I'm going to just look at the human rights element. We just can't, or else the injustice will continue, the abuse will continue, the young women will continue to be brutalized, raped and murdered, and the young children will continue to suffer. The Holy Prophet, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him, cried tears at human suffering. He would be at the forefront of this fight. He would not be there with the, dare I say, mullahs, passing fatwas for abuse of women and for children. Nobody in this room would be a Muslim if that was the case. Please allow me to finish on a slightly personal note. For me, we're all one. We share the same concerns. We all want to secure the same things. We want to secure freedom. We want to secure dignity. We want to secure equality. We want to secure respect, peace, freedom. It's in our nature. This is what it is to be a human. You aspire to these beautiful principles, these beautiful rights. But 2 years ago, I would have been in a whole different situation. I wouldn't be sat here now. I would be sat exactly where Anne-Marie and Mariam are, making these arguments. But I chose to investigate. I was shocked by Sharia. I went to Syria with my brother, and I looked at these ladies who were in hijab, and I had major concerns. I was saying, is this freedom? Are they willingly doing this? So it got me worried, so I started to investigate. And when I investigated, I found some very surprising things. I found that Sharia was all about beauty. I found dignity. I found equality. I found respect. I found freedom. And this is the most important thing I found. Freedom. Islam is freedom, and freedom is Islam. In my humble opinion, that is what Islam is all about, freedom. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. We're now going to open the discussion up to the floor. If you would like to ask any questions, please raise your hand, and I think we've got some stewards about with some microphones who are going to come and we have. That's not a microphone.
I'll just have to use this one then.
Okay, we've got one microphone, so
Testing. There we go.
hopefully everyone, yeah. Okay, so I'm sure that many of you will have something to say. So in the interest of hearing from as many people as possible, may I please request that questions are kept brief and to the point. We'll try and keep this sort of civil. Okay, so first question, gentleman at the front. Did you raise your hand?
Yes, thank
Yeah.
you, Chair.
Oh.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. My name is David Crawford. I find much to admire in the Ahmadiyya community with their message of a peaceful faith, which I understand brings them hostility and even persecution from other Muslims. And I have been a welcome guest at their Bait al-Futuh mosque in Morden during London Open House Day. I remain convinced that Sharia is gynophobic and inimical to women and their rights. I will take 3 quick source points since the relevance of source has been introduced. It is quite true, the point about women's testimony being worth half a man's comes in the context of a commercial negotiation in the Qur'an. But it is still discriminatory. Why shouldn't the man be forgetful and need to be reminded? The assumption is that women's brains are less strong, they are airheads. And it is used as a precedent, and Marie has said this is turning up in Sharia family courts in the UK, so it is being adduced as a precedent out with the commercial context. Secondly, the Qur'an does say, does commend, even command, wife beating. It says, good women are obedient. As for those from whom you fear, note the word fear, even before it's happened, disobedience, beat them and send them to beds apart. And the Qur'an also says, women are your fields, go into them as you please. These are back to sources. I found them gynophobic and inimical to women. Thank you.
Okay, so perhaps, Ayers, I know you made a comment explaining a bit about the woman's say being half as much as the man, and saying that you felt that that was a sort of an interpretation. But what about this allegation of beating? Do you have anything to say about that?
Yes, we can. Okay. With regards to the concept of beating wives, we must understand that every piece of the puzzle must be put together in order to understand the true message the Quran promotes. If we take one thing out of context, then we fail to understand the true message. For example, the Holy Quran says, La taqrabu salah. Don't go near prayer. Don't worship. Forget Allah. But let's see what's written after that as well. Allah says that don't do prayer when you are in a state of intoxication. You don't know what's going on, because then that defeats the purpose of worship. Similarly, with regards to wife beating, the common allegation, the fact of the matter is that firstly, the people that beat their wives, who are Muslims, they don't, when they get upset and they get a certain fit of rage, when they're about to hit their wife, they don't stop, think that the Quran teaches me I should beat my wife, and then follow out. They beat their wives because they're rotten people. They were going to beat their wives out of anger, whether the verse was there or not. Yes, they hide behind this verse and say that the Quran teaches this, but that's not why they beat their wives. Now, we must understand that the Holy Quran says that there's 3 steps, and the word in Arabic is used, nushuz, that when it gets to a degree that a person, when a wife begins to physically abuse, these are meanings which are included in the word nushuz. If you open any Arabic dictionary, it'll be written there. Disobedience doesn't do justice to the Arabic word. The Arabic word nushuz means when a wife becomes violent, she beats her husband, she raises her hand, then she begins to hate her husband, and she begins to have illicit relationships outside of the home, and these are all things which are involved there. And then she tells the children that they should also rebel against the father because he's a rotten man. Now, when it reaches that extreme state, then when a person feels angry and he feels like hitting his wife, Allah restrains the hand of a man and says, no, don't do that. Communicate, talk to each other, verbally express your dislike so that you can work something out together. That's the first step. Then secondly, the Holy Quran says that if that doesn't work and she continues and she grows in that, then you should separate yourself from her and do not have relationships with her. Now, it's very ironic that the concept of marital rape is attributed to Islam. But when a person is in an argument with his wife, when they're having difficult times, at that time, Quran states that you should stop marital relations. And this is sort of, quote unquote, a punishment. Okay, but actually it's a greater punishment for the man. Because as far as the woman is concerned, she doesn't like her husband anyway. She's already acting out of line and severely out of line. So she will say, go do what you want. Thank you very much. So why does the Quran teach that the husband should offer this sacrifice? Merely to hit home this psychological point that I'm displeased with you and what you're doing is ruining our relationship. So let's work together to change. And when she doesn't do that and she continues and progresses, then that final state is mentioned, that physical discipline can be done on the wife. And I know people laugh at this when we quote that the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, said that no mark should be left on the body. But let's just stop for a second and think about this. If a husband, forget beating or punching, if a husband even grabs his wife from her wrist hardly and pulls her to, you tend to have a mark left on the wrist of any woman, most women. So when the Holy Quran says that you should physically discipline them in this extreme situation, but don't leave a mark on them, that physical discipline is symbolic. It means nothing. It is even less than a person grabbing his wife very hurtfully. So no physical pain is inflicted on the wife, and that's not the purpose of the Quran. The Quran doesn't teach that physical pain should be inflicted on the wife. That's why the Holy Prophet has said this, that don't leave a mark. The purpose is only to hit home, like I said, this psychological point to a wife, that your actions are ruining our relationship. So let's work towards bettering ourselves, and you bettering yourself, and I understanding you better. And then when that doesn't work, then the next part of the verse says that if it still doesn't work, then arbitrate. Bring two people. That's it. I was going to end at that. That's
You've got
it.
a lot to say.
I was going to end it at that. That's
just
it.
to clarify, so you're basically saying that, I'll come to you. I will come to you. You're sort of saying that there is a whole process of things to go through, and it's sort of suggesting, be reasonable, all the rest of it. But at the end of it, it does sanction under certain situations the beating of the wife, as long as you don't hurt them. Is that a synopsis?
Such that no physical pain whatsoever is inflicted on the wife.
I mean, is that feasible to beat someone without inflicting pain? I mean,
If we understand beating to mean a punch or a slap or something like that, then of course it's impossible. But when we see the word daraba, which is used there in the Arabic, can also mean to simply, with the motion of a hand, grabs your wife and say, look at, what are you doing? And that would also be involved in the word daraba, merely with the actions of your hand to express displeasure. But like I said, that action of the hand should not inflict any pain whatsoever. It doesn't mean punch your wife or beat her or stab her. As we see in the UK, there's domestic violence cases are reported every minute in the UK, one domestic violence case is reported. And people usually don't do this. This is a restriction put on the Holy.
Okay,
by the Holy
thank you, Az. Now I know you're burning to say something, Mariam.
There's a couple of things I want to say, please.
Okay.
Can I say it?
Yeah, of course.
I think this would make a wonderful Disney movie because it's pure fantasy, in my opinion. In fact, I think what's being said actually reiterates what we've been saying. It reiterates what we've been saying. The difference is that there is a justification given for it that we don't give because we think it's wrong. Beating a woman without leaving marks is wrong, however you want to describe it. Hitting her with a feather is wrong, however you want to describe it. The inheritance, what's happening here is that, look, let me just say a few things. Religion doesn't change, it's society that changes. That's why laws continue to change and improve as a result of people fighting for them. Religion should be a private matter. That way you can interpret it any way you want and nobody cares. You go about your business, I go about mine. The reason we're discussing Sharia law is because it's in the public space. It's making laws. It's hanging people. It's stoning people to death in the 21st century. It's imprisoning women who've been raped, Gulnaz in Afghanistan, 12 years imprisonment for reporting a rape. And now she's being pardoned because she's agreed to marry her rapist. These are the realities that we're dealing with. Now, to say this has nothing to do with Islam, I wish I wouldn't even have to go there, because for me personally, it's not a question about Islam or religion per se. I've explained this because it's got to do with religion and political power. Christianity is cuddlier today because it's not running an inquisition. Islam seems different because it is spearheading an Islamic inquisition in the world. What I want to say, though, is it is going back to the Qur'an. It is dishonest to say that this Sharia law that is brutal and barbaric, and that you agree is brutal and barbaric, is not part of Islamic law. It is. Just to give you a few examples, is there a hadith of Muhammad that allows and sanctions stoning to death? Is there a hadith?
No.
Okay. Wait.
Yes, ma'am.
So are you saying here that Islam does not sanction death by stoning?
No.
It doesn't?
No.
Everybody agrees that it doesn't sanction death by stoning? Okay.
Yeah.
So how old was Aisha when Muhammad married her? So does it sanction child marriage? Does it sanction child marriage? Does Islam sanction child marriage? Yes or no?
I tell you, just gonna keep.
No, because this is, you see what the problem is? The problem is that we are being met with fantasy upon fantasy, when in fact the reality is very different. If you look at the Qur'an itself, you have this guest himself saying that when it comes...
Mariam, and not talk while she's talking, please. Thanks.
When you're discussing Surah Al-Nisa, there was an example of how it says that women can be beaten. The gentleman here explains that it shouldn't leave a mark, it should be done with a feather, it's symbolic. I say no beating whatsoever. That's the difference. Whether you justify it however way you want, the problem is that there is wife beating in the Qur'an, in the Sharia. And Islamic states are practicing Sharia and Islamic law. You don't accept Islamic jurisprudence, fine. Sharia law is also the Qur'an, it is also the Hadith. With the example of inheritance, you yourself just said that men get more because they have more responsibility. That is called discrimination in the 21st century. It is called discrimination. And so however you want to justify it, go ahead and do it. That is your prerogative. But don't say that Sharia law doesn't negate human rights, doesn't negate equality, doesn't negate women's rights, because it does. You're justifying it. You're justifying it. That is the difference between your argument and mine. Child marriage. How old was Aisha when? Why is the age of marriage under Sharia law 9 years old? Why?
She wasn't 9, by the way.
How old was she?
From different narrations, we can prove that she was 17
She
or
was
18.
now, she might have been 20 even from, I mean, this is the problem with arguing Islamic law, because there is dishonesty in it. And going back, you'll find wonderful verses in any religious text, and also those that ask for apostates to be burned and so on and so forth. That is the nature of religion.
It's not written in the
But
Quran.
if you are opposed to Sharia law, I welcome all of you to join. The Sharia law that you say is not really Sharia law. I'm expecting each and every one of you to be joining the One Law for All campaign and speaking out loudly against the Sharia law in this country, in Iran, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Saudi Arabia, and elsewhere.
Thank you, Mariam. Just quickly, but before we move on to the next point, I know both of you quickly want to say something.
I just want to say something very, very quickly. About it's not that verse in the Quran that makes a man beat his wife, absolutely, but it is that verse in the Quran that lets him get away with it time and time again. It is that verse in the Quran that is applied in Sharia law and referred to in Sharia law, so that women are sent back to be beaten time and time again. So please don't tell me that that verse in the Quran has no bearing on this. And as for being beaten but leaving no marks, just what about the status that gives a woman? What about the position it puts her in? He's allowed to hit you, but don't worry, he's not allowed to hurt you too badly. What status does that give a woman? It's disgraceful that we are defending this. Absolutely disgraceful.
Jonathan, what do you have to say? So, shouldn't the Quran just be saying don't beat her at all? And in any case, if you do beat her, isn't it a bit sort of fantastical to think that you might be able to beat her without leaving a mark or hurting her?
Okay, so what word would we use to describe wife beating? I would pick, no, not the Arabic. I'd pick the word shameful. It's shameful to beat your wife, is it not? Does anybody disagree?
I think so.
Yeah, we all agree it's shameful to beat your wife. Would any man in here?
I think so. Are we gonna?
Hang on. Please. Okay, sure. Okay, but yeah, sure. So it's shameful, isn't it? Nobody disagrees with this. In particular, two very important people do not disagree with this. So the first one is the Holy Prophet, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him. So he never did it, ever. He never once beat his wife. Okay, hang on. So can I make no. Hi guys. Can I make no.
Have some degree of order and just let Jonathan speak. If you want to make a point, if you can put your hand up afterwards and make that point.
Can we make that as a general principle, not just for me? I mean, I don't personally mind for myself, but we can't all chat. Everybody put their hand up and then direct it. We'll just get a much better debate that way, yeah. But essentially, it's a shameful act. It is classed as a shameful act within Islam. There are many acts which are allowed within Islam, but which are considered shameful. Yeah, so what's another one? Divorce is another one. For a man and for a woman, the right to marriage, it's considered a sacred thing. And it is a very destructive thing. Everybody's incredibly upset when there's a divorce. So it's something you should work against. You should look to remove it. So this is why the Holy Prophet, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him, never once, ever beat his wife. Didn't lay a finger, not a pinky finger, so that wasn't a lie. Another person, for people in the room that have followed up the hadith of the Holy Prophet, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him, that there would be a Messiah who would come, will also take into account his opinion. So his name was Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, and I'll say after his name, peace be upon him, because I believe he was the Messiah which was promised by Almighty God. Let me put it this way, you cannot understand Islam in this modern age, in my opinion, without the promised Messiah alayhi salam. It's impossible, it's a minefield. And I nearly gave up on Islam completely because I was in the exact same situation as Maryam was, where she was saying, what on earth am I going to do? You've got all this fiqh, you've got all these mullahs, you've got all this myriad of complex, convoluted Islam, and what you've got behind is a bunch of men who are murdering and raping women. You don't have this beauty of Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him. You've got a disgusting situation. So for me, I was very torn. I was like, I want the beauty of this man that I see, but I don't want the beauty of those who vandalize him. It was only because of the man who claimed to be the promised Messiah, who brings clarity to Islam and removes misunderstanding and prevents abuse of these laws and prevents the abuse of human rights using these laws, that human rights and Islam can never be compatible ever again, in my own opinion. Let me give you an example on wife beating. So there's a book called The Essence of Islam, which has been written by the promised Messiah, may peace be upon him. He said that he once raised his voice to his wife, and afterwards he prayed continually for forgiveness for having raised his voice. He felt absolute shame. He said to raise your voice to your wife is a shameful act. What status does that give women? Better status than I think we give women in our country.
So, Jonathan, I'm sure you go on speaking about this a lot, and I know you've made some of that. You can say one more thing, but I just want to ask you a quick question. I mean, you're coming up with all these good things that the Quran has said, and it seems obvious that, it has said many of those good things. But I think maybe the direct question that Mariam and Maria are asking you is there perhaps a degree of contradiction in that one level it's saying, oh, do this, be nice, and then on another point it's saying, oh, actually, it's not good, but you can do it, sort of thing. I mean, is that contradictory?
The simple answer is no. Let me deal with one thing which Anne-Marie said, which is a very short. Sorry, but it goes on to a broader point. We need to understand Islam. What is Islam all about? Firstly, is it a fantasy? It's not a fantasy, if I can respectfully say, because you won't get within the Ahmadiyya community, the human rights violations happening. It's a peaceful community, a community of peace. What is peace? Peace is Islam, and Islam is peace. I was in a Cambridge, I've told people this before, but I was in a meeting up in Cambridge when I was an Ahmadi Muslim, and a consultant cardiologist essentially told me that it would be permissible for a Christian who was previously a Muslim to be killed under apostasy. I went home disgusted. I wanted to give up on Islam. I said, I can't have these hadith. If somebody's going to tell me this is revolting. But thank God that it isn't true. And this is very similar with domestic violence. Domestic violence, the rules from the Qur'an have been completely manipulated, completely destroyed by fatwas of various people. The fiqh which has been developed from it has led to absolute desecration of human rights. But so to go back to your point, essentially, is there contradiction? No, there isn't, because the objective is exactly the same. The International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights looks to outlaw domestic violence completely. It's been around for a long time now. Has it worked? No, domestic violence is rife in our society. Terrible. And I know this. Yeah. And this happens. So we haven't cracked it completely. We've gone very much in the right direction. You outlaw, essentially, the abuse of women. But at the same time, how does Islam deal with it? It deals with it in a slightly different way. It secures the human right to prevent domestic violence. But Islam, in all of its angles, is a holistic philosophy which takes man in its entirety, the best and the worst, the saints and the most brutal rapists, the genocideers, the worst of humanity. Nobody is excluded from Islam. And consider it as a theory. What's the best way to reform a human being? To essentially outlaw behavior which is happening all over the world, or to say, hang on, so you want to do this? Okay, if you want to do this, then first do this, and then do this, and then what, you want to beat your wife? You can touch her, but if you leave a mark on her skin, then you're going to hell.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think we're going to have to finish it there. Any more questions? Gentleman at the front here. Okay. We'll come back to you immediately afterwards, okay? If we just go for... Yeah, okay. We'll have some women. You don't need to worry. I'm not...
Sharia contrary to human rights.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
The motion is not, is Sharia law in X country contrary to human rights? Or is Sharia in any particular, as particularly understood, contrary to human rights? So first of all, in relation to Sharia, you have to really find out in relation to all those issues, whether you're talking about testimony, divorce, wife beating or whatever, what are these Islamic positions on it? And always, what always happens is when everybody, because the Holy Qur'an is actually quite clear on all these things like divorce and like testimony and like everybody's human rights, as has actually been pointed out by the two Ahmadi speakers. Right? But we always come down to this one issue, which is about wife beating, that in this one verse it actually says. Whereas isn't that right? That's the only thing that you can actually find. Whereas the Holy Prophet himself, as regards the interpretation of that clause, said, and it was quite clear, and that's been made quite clear by Mr. Ayaz and both the Ahmadi speakers, that it does not mean that men can actually beat women such that they can actually hurt them. Okay, this is an absolute hadith in relation to this. So I think we need to get over this, that, this obsession with this one particular verse, and as regards your particular interpretation and saying that it's actually giving license, because that's basically what you're saying. You're saying this verse is essentially giving license and cover. It's not giving license and cover. The Ahmadiyya community or its interpretation as regards Sharia is totally contrary to this. And as regards all of those other issues with regard to divorce or testimony or whatever else, Islamic law is absolutely quite clear. And when we say Islamic law, Sharia, it means what's written in the Holy Quran. It's not what's being interpreted by the Islamic Council. It's not what's being done in Afghanistan or in Iran or wherever else.
If we just hear from this lady there, and then we'll hear from you, and then we'll sort of go back to the panel. So I know lots of you have got things to say, so we'll hear from a few of you.
There are international laws that wouldn't allow for America and England to enter Palestine or enter Iraq, right? That would be wrong. There's a book of laws that disallows it. So when stuff like that happens, would you blame that book for what's happening. You wouldn't. The same way, why would you blame the Quran, what was happening with the people? It's the way the people interpret the Quran. That's what's happening with the honor killing. And my question would be, if you get rid of the Sharia law, would that really stop the injustice that's happening to women? What about the laws that are being passed in Russia that even disallow people to talk about gay and lesbian relationships in public? If you do, you go straight to prison. Or what about honor killing in Venezuela or China or India? That's got nothing to do with Islam or Muslim countries. So would getting rid of Sharia law, would that really give justice to women all over the world? Or what about the laws that are passed in Holland to allow prostitution? Is that a law to honor women at all? It's not really, is it? And it's got nothing to do with Sharia law.
We just hear from this gentleman here. This gentleman here wants to say something.
Right, it's a very interesting debate. You may be right that the Sharia law, as practiced in other countries, is not really true Sharia law. But the problem is, this is how it is practiced in the Muslim countries. The problem is, it's interpreted by people who've studied the Quran, who've studied the sayings of Muhammad, and so on. And the problem for you is, and problem for everyone, is that this is how it is interpreted as a fact now. Now, you may be right, it may be perfectly true, it may not be true Islam. The problem is that in all the Islamic countries, that is how it's practiced, and that is why it can be against human rights.
Okay, so, I mean, Anne-Marie, I think I'm going to ask you a question here. We've got a sort of theme emerging, and it's this thing about, you know, the true Sharia, interpretation of Sharia, Sharia in different countries. As someone who opposes it, do you feel possible to sort of say, well, okay, maybe these countries have got it wrong, but perhaps some interpretations are okay? You know, perhaps the Ahmadiyya interpretation is okay, or do you feel downright
we're not
it's
here
all...
to discuss this man's interpretation, which, may I say, is very lovely and fluffy, but bears no resemblance whatsoever to the reality or this man's interpretation. We're here to see it, as the man over here says, how it is practiced. This all sounds lovely, what these two men are saying, but it's not the reality. The reality is women being stoned to death. The reality is children being sold into marriage. That's the reality, and they call it Sharia. So what makes you right and all those people wrong? And as for your point, I mean, that's what I call whataboutery, I'm afraid. I mean, we're not here to discuss prostitution laws in Amsterdam or China or Russia or any of the other cruelties imposed upon women. But yes, Sharia removal of Sharia tribunals in this country would bring more women under the protection of the law of England and Wales, where they should be. So that's what we're talking about.
So
at least both of the speakers like the interpretation of Islam which we presented, because it's logical.
Don't speak on
it's
my
not
behalf.
a human rights injustice. And now this question about whether practically that's how Sharia law is practiced, well, this is exactly our outcry, that Sharia law is being practiced in Iran, in Afghanistan, in Saudi Arabia, wherever the case may be, in a manner which does not do justice to the original text. So it's not our problem to go and take it up with them. It's, as Johnny very beautifully said, it's all of our responsibility to take it up so that we can live together as a harmonious society. So this is our responsibility, and this is exactly why we're here today, to try and explain this point, that Islam isn't how it is practically being played out today. Islam is how it was practiced by the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and by his khulafa, and we hope and pray that that Islam can be reinstituted today, that Islam of human rights which gives everybody equal rights. And this is what the Ahmadiyya Muslim community does day in and day out. And our friend over here said that I know the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. They are a very peaceful community. This is our message. This is why we are fighting day and night for everybody's human rights.
Thank you, Alice.
Just to clarify, there was a hint of sarcasm in that, but I do also think that you're lying in some ways. I mean, and you're misrepresenting it. This is not what you're saying is Sharia. Isn't how Sharia is practiced, and it's that we're talking about. And it's of no comfort that you offer this fluffy interpretation of Sharia. It's of no comfort to the woman being buried in the ground and stones thrown at her head. It's of no comfort to her.
Sorry, Az. So you're saying, you know, you have less objection at least to this gentleman's interpretation, but you're saying you don't even like their interpretation. And why is that?
The thing is that this is something that happens all the time when you discuss Sharia law. You have a group of people, like this young woman, who say, what about this and what about that? If I go to a rally against US-led militarism and for Israel to get out of Palestine, I don't have people coming and telling me, well, what about, Hezbollah, or what about, what Britain is doing, or what about what Iran is doing? Because that is the goal of that rally, to fight against the Israeli occupation of Palestine, to fight against US-led militarism. We are talking now about Sharia law, not about what happens in Venezuela and elsewhere. The point of the matter is that violence against women and human rights violations exist everywhere. There's no doubt about it. We're not saying that it's only Sharia law that's violating rights and that negates human rights. But what we're saying is, can we agree that it does negate human rights? The speakers here agree with us in a way, because they're saying that what we're saying is true, but that's not the real Sharia. What I'm saying is that this is the second thing that we often hear when we're debating on this issue, is people justifying the surahs in the Qur'an, the hadith, Islamic jurisprudence, justifying it, and in a sense, basically the same, it ends up meaning the same thing. Because if you say that a surah al-Nisa, for example, says that you only beat your wife as a last option, yes, it's wonderful, possibly in your opinion, not in mine, as a 21st century human being. At one time, it was giving men who beat their wives mercilessly, to giving them limits. First, you've got to talk to her, then you've got to confine her, then at the last option, beat her. And then if you're going to beat her, make sure there are no marks. And if you're going to beat her, do this symbolically. What I'm saying is that all you're doing is justifying something that is inhuman, which is allowing for the unequal status of men and women and allowing for violence against women. You might justify it as a feather or leaving no marks. It's still violence against women. And that's why I don't agree with your interpretation, because all it's doing is justifying what we see as the reality of Sharia law today everywhere. It's not a fantasy. We're not talking about another planet. We're not talking about centuries ago. We're talking about today. And we see the effects of Sharia law every day. So don't tell me that that's not Sharia law. And I haven't seen any of you at rallies against Sharia law. It would be wonderful to have you come in front of the Iranian embassy and say, I'm against stoning. There's no hadith on it. I had a debate on the BBC at a panel discussion. There was someone from the Sufi sect who then came to justify the hadith against stoning. He said, well, in the hadith against stoning, this woman came to Muhammad and begged him to stone her to death. And Muhammad refused. And he sent her away. And she came back again for a second time and begged her. And he still refused. And she came back for a third time and she begged him to stone her. And then he stoned her. Well, I don't care what your justification is. I don't want stoning. I don't want domestic violence. I don't want a woman's testimony to worth half a man's, even if it's only in financial matters. I don't want it. We live in the 21st century. Religion, as your personal belief, is your right, but as law, it is a very different matter, and I will fight it to the end. It negates human rights. Full stop.
Okay, we're just going to have a very, very, very brief point from Jonathan, then a few more questions from the floor. So you keep it to a minute, 2 minutes, something like that.
Try my best. So this isn't the first time that the Middle East and the Arabic countries, not to limit it to the Arabic countries, let's talk about the world over, but let's say Saudi Arabia. This isn't the first time in history that Saudi Arabia has been in a dire state. Is it? It's been in a much worse state than this before. There was once a time when infanticide was practiced regularly. So a child was born and it would be immediately killed if it was a female. When it was an act of honor to rape and to murder women. So this was a time in which the morality and the human rights practice of Saudi Arabia was much worse. But then something happened. The Holy Prophet, may the peace and blessings of God, came to Arabia. And what happened to that society? It became a place in which the respect and protect of human rights at the time of the Holy Prophet, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him, which is the time that we care about in terms of the Sunnah. The Sunnah is just the practice of this man. May peace and blessings of God be upon him. He reformed that society completely. There was no longer any situation where there was any need for human rights abuse. There wasn't human rights abuse. There wasn't a situation where, in fact, there wasn't the kind of social problems that we all face now, that we all work every day to remove, the situations of rape, the situations of murder, of prostitution. These things that we work against, that we're all working against here, are we not? The issue of one law for all is how to remove the abuse of women and children and the most vulnerable. And the issue of, and yeah, I missed what Anne-Marie said, but basically the only solution that was found in Arabia was the practice of the Holy Prophet. And it was a revolution, one of the most amazing moral revolutions which has ever occurred.
So Jonathan, I take your point that, maybe when Islam came along to the Arab world at the time, it made some great improvements. And I'm sure, well, possibly not, I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but that, maybe Mariam and Anne-Marie may possibly agree. It possibly was worse before Islam. But I'm sure maybe they would be thinking, well, maybe it was a move forward at the time, but now it's behind, some sort of Western values. I mean, what would you say to that? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the values are identical. There's no distinction between the values of Islam and 21st century Britain. Just go to where can you find our values? Let's look to the preambles of all of the human rights treaties. I've said this before. I've got a document I wanted to give to everybody. Now is perhaps a worthwhile time to mention it. I've just been keenly working away like a bit of a keynote, and I've produced essentially a human rights charter based of Qur'an and Hadith. So this goes through every one of the articles and every one of the principles and demonstrates how the Qur'an and the Hadith satisfies and protects every one of these. It doesn't right now. We're destroying the world through the supposed practice of the love of God and love of humanity. But are the values the same? The values are identical. The values that we have now are very much formed by the gospel of Jesus Christ, may peace be upon him. We live in a beautiful country very much because we've adopted beautiful practices from over millennia which have taken time to develop from all over the world. This is my opinion, that essentially the values that we hold dear are the exact same values which Islam holds dear. So if that is a direct answer to your question.
So what you're saying is, just to wrap up, your summary, you're saying that actually you think that your interpretation, at least, of the Islamic values is that they are completely non-contradictory with secular society and protection.
Absolutely.
Okay, we're going to have to move on, I think, and get some more questions from the audience. Chap over there in the red top. If we can get a microphone over there.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Firstly, I don't come from I'm a Muslim, but I'm not from the Ahmadiyya sect. So there is a certain point of departure from what Johnny and the other speaker have been saying. But focusing on to the two speakers who spoke to the Sharia law negates human rights, especially, and there was this reference to the 21st century, and also the reference to women in the 21st century. What I'd like to sort of get your response on the Arab Spring, right? Let's look at Tunisia. Let's look at Egypt. Because last week, and also Libya, because last week I was reading the Economist, where the niqab was banned under Gaddafi. And the women of Benghazi who led the fight for independence, freedom, and liberty in Libya, the first thing they have done since obtaining independence or obtaining that freedom was to wear the hijab or wear the niqab. The same thing happens in Turkey. After years of secular rule, the women of Turkey want Islamic law, want the hijab. It happens in France, where women are fighting for the niqab. It happens in Egypt, where after years of secular rule, they want the demonic Muslim Brotherhood, Islamic law. It happens in Tunisia. So that needs to, that's something that I have not seen anyone explaining. The second issue is the point about the Sharia is what the Sharia does. Well, and also there was so much about the human rights philosophy. And one of the great documents of human rights is the American Declaration of Independence, which declared that that everyone is born free and equal, when half the population were living as slaves, right? And if you ask me, if you ask all those Tottenham rioters or those banged up in Belmarsh, well, the ECHR did nothing to protect their rights. but what I'd like to really know is why do you think, but I think the real issue is what makes people, is what really ensures the happiness and well-being of human beings. And that's the thing that we need to look at. And the question we need to ask is why are people in the 21st century still calling for and clamoring for the Sharia law then?
So should we... Another point? Chap at the back there?
Hi there. I'd just like to make the point that...
Yeah, we just wait for the microphone maybe.
Hi there. Hello? Just turn it, stand off. Oh, sorry. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to make the point that Mariam, she mentioned that religion is a matter of personal thing, and you're absolutely right. And in a sense, what have we done to speak out against it? I think there's these 2 points. First of all, religion is absolutely a personal thing, and I just wanted to comment that it should be noted that the Quran doesn't speak of religion as a public affair that should be punishable. It speaks of a democratic system whereby you are to elect the people who are most fitting for the role into power. And as Ayaz pointed out, that can quite easily mean that a Christian person is actually the head of it's Sharia where Sharia is being practiced. Sharia effectively meaning, in a sense, what we're putting forth, secularism. Because it's only through secularism that you can ensure absolute fairness. The second point I'd like to raise is that there's this dichotomy throughout this entire talk about is it the Islam of the Prophet of Islam or is it the Islam of today? Now, at the end of the day, Islam has been 1,500 years old now, and it's going to get even older day by day, as we know. The fact of the matter is the interpretations of Islam have varied widely, and it's in actual fact completely meaningless, in my opinion, to talk about Sharia in the context of any temporal thing. It's only relevant when you talk about it with respect to a fixed objective thing, and that is universally acknowledged by as the practice of the Prophet of Islam. So, at the end of the day, you may say, oh, well, what about Iran, what about Afghanistan, so on and so forth. But Iran and Afghanistan vary in their own interpretation of Sharia between themselves. And so if we're going to be talking about Sharia, we have to fix our definitions. And I don't see a temporal definition which changes between every country is valid.
So what you're saying essentially is that, you know, these countries, I mean, they've all got pretty much, or many of them have bad interpretations or unpleasant interpretations, but they're all a bit different anyway. And you're sort of saying, well, this whole idea of this thing called Sharia law, it's not really any single thing. It's whatever you think it is. Sort of, is that?
I'm saying it is a single thing, and it's the thing that how the Prophet of Islam practiced it, and that's the only way you can talk about it. It's meaningless otherwise.
Okay. So, I mean, is there an argument then that essentially, you know, you've got all these countries with their different interpretations, their barbaric interpretations potentially. Is that maybe because these countries, whether they had the Qur'an or not, would have barbaric and oppressive laws, and that maybe, you know, give it 200 years, something like that, there will be completely different countries that have modernized? Or is there something you think that is fundamental, a problem caused by the Qur'an?
Look, I mean, if you take the argument of interpretation, yeah, well, then yours is also just another interpretation. That's it. So the Islamic Republic of Iran's is an interpretation, yours is an interpretation, Saudi's is an interpretation, the Afghan government's is an interpretation, they're all interpretations. And it's a prescription for inaction and not doing anything. The reality is, if there's an interpretation that's wrong, well, they say your interpretation's wrong. And furthermore, they're the ones in political power, not you. Yeah? And if you were in political power, I would like to see what your religion would really be like. But that's not to know until the reality happens. What we do know is that irrespective of all these lovely different interpretations, it's all the same. For apostates, death penalty. For gays, execution. For adulterers. If there are some countries under Sharia law that don't stone people to death, it's not because Islam doesn't say they should. It's because of secular movements and civil rights movements in those countries that don't allow for religion to be the ruler, the law of the land. That is why there are distinctions in the practice. But if you look at a Sharia court here in Britain, the same thing is happening to a woman in Bradford as is happening to a woman in Tehran, as is happening to a woman in Kabul, as is happening to a woman in, Baghdad. It's the same thing. So you can be happy by saying it's a question of interpretations. It doesn't apply to me. But when it comes to interpretation, it always comes down with the force of the boot on the woman's back. The other thing about secularism, it's interesting how secularism is being rewritten and revised. Secularism means religion out of the public space. Not every religion in the public space doing whatever the hell they want. That's not secularism. I think what happens with the rise of political religion, you're seeing a rewriting of the term secularism. We are reclaiming that word back. We are reclaiming it back and saying religion is a private matter. Please keep it to yourself. But don't put it in the law. Don't bring it into the state. It has no business to be there, because the reality is that even if there is a country where 100% of the people are Muslim, which is never the case, not every Muslim in that country thinks the same. There will be gay Muslims. There will be apostate Muslims. There will be atheists. There will be socialists. There will be secularists, feminists. They're not all the same. And that's why the most important reason why secularism is necessary and religion has to be kept out of the public space. Two other things. Islam brought a moral revolution. I don't think any religion brings moral revolution. It is the height of immorality, in my opinion, the height of immorality. And finally, on the Arab Spring, the people who fought for freedom in the Middle East and North Africa fought for freedom. They didn't fight for Islamism, because Islamism and Sharia law is a movement to restrict people's rights and take away their freedoms. The results, because why? Because US-led militarism no. Islam, I'll tell you the connections because you don't know it, obviously, because I come from the birthplace of contemporary political Islam. Islamism, the green belt, during...
Can we calm down and just let Mariam
Islamism was the result, the rise of Islamism was the result of US foreign policy to create a green belt around the Soviet Union at the time. There was a meeting in Guadeloupe by world Western powers that decided that they prefer an Islamic regime in Iran rather than the left-leaning revolution that was taking place. An Islamic republic in Iran came into power by slaughtering an entire generation in that country. If you look at US-led militarism, even today, in Iraq, more Islamic than before. In Afghanistan, more Islamic than before. They're even bringing the Taliban back. And
so I think maybe we're getting a bit...
No, it was a question about the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring. I'll just say one last sentence. I'll say one last sentence. That's why, in my opinion, Sharia law is the demand of Islamism, not the demand of Muslims.
But why are these women voting for these Islamic groups? And your point about...
They're not voting.
Sorry,
Who's voting?
Can we not just have shouting out from the audience, please? Sorry. Can we not have just...
Who's voting? Who's voting?
Excuse me, can you please stop?
Do you know what voting is? Do you know what voting is?
Can I just...
Do you know what voting is? They're not voting.
Can you... Okay. I think the whole topic of Islamism and where perhaps this particularly, politicized branch of Islam has come from is a very interesting issue. However, maybe we could save that for another debate.
Can I just say something? That's even more relevant than the tenets of Islam and the Qur'an. Because that is what Sharia law is. Sharia law is a political movement with state power, with courts, with police, with military, and that's what we're talking about. So what the tenets say.
I think.
No, I'm the one who's got death threats against me, so don't try to turn the tables around, please.
Look,
Thank you very much.
Everyone here feels quite passionately about this, so if we can all just try and stay calm and be civil.
We are calm.
Yeah, I know. Really? It seems pretty tense to me.
Well, it's the issue.
It's just, to be conducive to conversation. I think we'll move on to something else in a minute, but I just think maybe one of the points that was raised earlier that I think we can bring back to, I think what a lot of people here are perhaps wondering is, why single out the Quran when, if you look at, say, medieval Europe, there were lots of oppressive regimes and dreadful things that were done in the name of Christianity. I mean, back then, would you have campaigned against the Bible and against Christianity, or is the Quran particularly? But yeah, I'm asking you. I was just. I think yeah. Anyway.
I mean, as I've said, I'm against all religious laws. The One Law for All campaign is against the Beth Din as well, which is the Jewish courts that have been in existence for over 100 years in this country, because we believe that religion is fundamentally, when it's in the law, when it's in the educational system, when it's in the judicial system, it contradicts and negates human rights. I've mentioned before as well that religion never changes, it's society that changes. And I even mentioned the fact that in this day and age, it's similar to what happened during the Spanish Inquisition. And when Christianity had political power, we are now faced with what I think is an Islamic Inquisition, where and so we're fighting it. Why do I fight against Sharia law? Because I'm an apostate who would be punished by death. I've fled Sharia courts. I've lived under Sharia law. And so that's why I'm also opposed to many other things. I'm opposed to US-led militarism. I want socialism. I do many things. But this discussion is about Sharia law. And whether I would fight Christianity, I have. I've fought bishops in the House of Lords. I've fought faith schools, whether it's the Church of England schools or whatever. I don't think there should be an established church in this country, and so on and so forth. They're all linked to me. Religion is this. To me, I don't think Islam is worse. I've said it before. All religions are bad, in my opinion. They're bad for human rights. They're bad for human rights.
All right, thank you. I think we're going to get a few more points from the... Okay, you can come back, but please be very, very brief. Very brief.
Okay.
I know it's tempting to talk for very long, but...
Sorry, okay. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Okay, so 3 points. First point, we should be joining Mariam, I think, in many ways, and Anne-Marie, in condemning these things. The Holy Prophet, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him, commands anybody who's a Muslim to speak out against injustice, and this is a violation of injustice. So anybody that wouldn't speak out against these actions could not be, in my humble opinion, which is worth nothing really, a Muslim. They simply couldn't be a Muslim. Secondly, but however, I'd ask a separate obligation on our sisters, on our friends. If you could, and I'd like to meet up again to actually do this, to actually look at true Sharia, to go through so that we can separate out. We can go on this. I mean, this is what I've done for the last year and 10 months. It's not an impossible job. It does involve, to some extent, some sort of spiritual attitude towards it, but it is very, very much possible, and it's incredibly worthwhile. And why is it worthwhile? That's my second point. The people that you're looking to persuade don't care about human rights. They care about Islam, because they think that what they're doing is fulfilling their religious obligations. Do they not? They're ready to die for Islam. There are people who are ready to commit the worst atrocities in the world because they think they're going to paradise. How do you deal with somebody like that? Do you just reject their belief system and their ideology and say, you know what, it's too messy, it's too muddy, I'm not having any of it? When I was close to doing that myself, I was on the edge of doing that because of the state of of modern day Islam. There's beautiful Muslims, and I have many Muslim friends that aren't Ahmadi Muslims. Hijaz is one of them, and lovely people. But there are many people who practice the most horrendous things in the world. So we do have to join force on this. And I think we're talking past each other. We're ignoring what we're saying here when I'm offering that as a genuine promise, on a personal capacity anyway. So in order to overcome abusive Sharia, you have to find true Sharia. You cannot simply reject Sharia, because people are coming to Islam. It is increasing. Many people are coming to Islam. It's not about to go away, in my opinion, because it is the religion which is natural to man. Islam is just an Arabic term for peace and submission. There is no distinction, no separation within religion. That's the true message of Islam. Jesus Christ, Moses, Abraham, Buddha, Krishna, may peace be upon all of them, were from one source. And there is one power driving this. And from the history of the world, it doesn't look like religion's about to go away. So we can't ignore it. We have to deal with it head on and seek truth. And that's what the Ahmadiyya community does. Third point, really quick, so quick. It's going to go straight past you.
Yep.
We aren't the first people to say this. Do you know who said it first? Who first told us that Islam was going to go to the dogs? Do you know who first said it? It was the Holy Prophet, may the peace and blessings of Almighty God be upon him. He said the countless prophecies about what would happen to this religion, which are unbelievably accurate to what is happening today. He said people would be brutal, that they would brutalize people, they would have no mercy, that they would go through. I'm not an expert on Hadith, I'd rather leave it to who he has, but there was countless prophecies about what would happen. The mosques would be full, their hearts would be empty. He saw it coming. According to me, however, and in light of this, I would suggest the only solution, it's not just simply a human solution. It is, in fact, in my own opinion, and I shouldn't hold back on this, it is, in fact, a spiritual solution. And it is, in fact, to pay attention to these spiritual elements, to investigate them, to pay due attention to them, to welcome it within Western society, with all of the values which are inherent within our own hearts, of peace, of dignity, of equality, of respect, and to investigate the prophecy which was itself saying, I will send a Messiah. Without that Messiah, there will be no possibility for peace. In my own opinion, and I'm a human rights lawyer, I teach at this university, I'm not a nutter. I hope I'm not a nutter. Okay, my own humble opinion. We may challenge that, but let's have a coffee and talk about this. I do not believe there is a solution to solving religious differences by ignoring religion. It is only by investigating religion, seeking truth, and doing this. I'm sorry, I don't know any other way. I cannot think of any other way.
Jonathan. Girl at this lady, okay, this lady there, and you've had your hand up for ages, we'll have you, yeah. If we get the microphone.
Underneath, on the very bottom. Very bottom.
Yeah. Yeah, there's been a lot of things of saying about the values of Islam and the values of Sharia, but that's not, as has been pointed out, that's not. It's nothing to do with how it's practically applied to law. This debate is about Sharia law and has been applied to law. It's not. We're not trying to ignore religion or negate a religion, or we're negating how it's been applied in courts in countries where. Like in Britain, where the laws are quite forward-thinking and protect women, and then you've also got Sharia courts that are completely backward-thinking. And it's not, yeah, maybe they're interpreting it in the wrong way, but you've yet to bring forward an example of where it's been interpreted in the right way in a practical application of law. It seems that every time it's been practically applied has been incorrect in a way that persecutes women, that's bad for human rights, and there's just no example of it being practically applied where it's not. So. Yeah.
We have to say, unfortunately, we're actually running out of time. So what we're going to have to do is hear a few more points from the audience, and then maybe a few last comments from the panel, and then begin to wrap it up. So if we hear this girl here, looks desperate. So.
I'm actually going to move on from all the other things, but there's one point which has been very much justified. Is regarding inheritance, and I want to say that I'm so happy that I live in a country like UK who gave me my right of my inheritance, and the gentleman there, he justified inheritance of a woman to be half of a man, because the husband has more responsibilities, he has the main earner. But what if a woman doesn't have a husband? I happen to be a widow, and thank God I live in this country and I managed to get my inheritance correctly. My brother has a family, he has children. He has his, why should he have twice as much as I do? I'm alone, I do not have a husband, I have children. Why should he have twice as much? And why should my son, for example, when my husband died, get a lot more than I do? Mm-hmm. And I think the woman as a mother has a lot less rights. And thank God I live in this country and gave me my rights to inherit equally as anybody else in there. And I don't think it's justifiable to say a man now, I know most of the women here who have wives who earns just as much as them, or even more. So I don't think it is in the 21st century to say a man earns more, he has more responsibility than a woman. I think the woman has double the amount of responsibility as a man in this country and every country.
Okay, and we're going to have, sorry, I know loads of you want to say things. We're going to have two final points. We're going to have this gentleman at the front here, and then...
Lenny has response.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, I think if we respond to, because we're running kind of short on time.
Right, first of all, let me just comment on what Ms. Namazi said a few moments back. Your name actually is a very nice name, and your surname is beautiful. Namazi means the one who says prayers regularly. No, no pun intended. So it's just the fact is, in fact, your name is beautiful. You must have a great family background. And you said a few things, a lot of passion as well, I think. I appreciate that as well. You mentioned about something about apostasy, and you are basically, you've got the threats of death as well. And so am I, with a similar background as you are. I'm an Ahmadi Muslim. And in Pakistan, I'm seen to be somebody who has actually left Islam and I should be killed. And my brothers have been killed actually in 86 Ahmadis on a day, as a matter of fact, because we're apostates. But my approach is different to yours, Ms. Namazi. My approach is that I'm going to say pray to God. And I'll say to Allah that, in fact, whatever these Muslims are doing at the moment, they bring names of Islam into disrepute. And as a matter of fact, I'm equally passionate as you are, if not even more, that this has to be stopped. And I'm with you, and I'll join forces with you, do whatever you want, I'll do for you. But the fact is, understand, Sharia law is not the Sharia law given to us by the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Sharia law, I fully appreciate your concerns, are absolutely valid, but the fact is, my understanding of Islam is very, very, very different. So please listen to us carefully. We'll love to see you again sometime in the future, and we'll explain to you what we really stand for. Thank you.
And one final point.
Yeah, I think, is this on? Can you hear me? Right. I think, well, just one final point, Jacob.
Okay, we'll have one after. There's this girl at the back. She really wants to. So, okay, no. We're having 2 points. We're having him and then her, and then the panel.
I've got a couple of things to say. First of all, it's very clear that the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, to some extent at least, agrees with some of the premises that you guys are saying, in the sense that the way that Sharia law is currently being practiced in the world is inhuman. However,
those guys at the back, turn around. They can't hear you.
However, to the point that you're saying things like it doesn't matter about interpretation, and that it's we don't really care, it's all one and the same. I think you're fundamentally wrong there. And the reason that you're fundamentally wrong is, as my brother Jonathan pointed out, the people that you're trying to convince are not going to care about your legal system, they're not going to care about your law. They're people who are interested in spirituality. And the only way that Islam is going to be reformed, the only way that things are going to be changed is through a spiritual angle. It's not through a legal angle, and you can't force them into it. It's just not going to work. The reality is that you have to make people understand the truth of Islamic teachings in order to reform them. And this is exactly the same thing when it comes to terrorism in Islam, for example. People ask me the same question. Well, what difference does it make if Islam doesn't allow you to commit acts of violence? What difference does it make if Islam doesn't allow you to kill apostates? Well, the difference it makes is that the reformation of Muslims is actually the paramount thing of importance in the world today. You're not going to, I guarantee you can do as much work as you want, but it's not going to work if you do it through your entirely, religion doesn't count, and it's all about the laws and the legal systems of the country. That's point number one. And secondly, I think as a Muslim myself, I find it very deeply offensive that you tar all Muslims with this kind of, well, it's Sharia is as Sharia does. Because you know what? Yes, okay, Sharia is as Sharia does, but I live by a Sharia law, and I don't live by a Sharia law that in any way reflects any of the things that you've actually been talking about today. And I think that you, as individuals and as the leaders of an entire movement, need to actually make that very explicitly clear. You may think it's a matter of pedantry, but for us it's not a matter of pedantry. For us, this is a matter of our life and our feelings, and the fact that some of the things that you're saying are very insulting and hurtful to the prophet of our religion, which is obviously very insulting and hurtful to us. And I think the bottom line is that, I've pretty much said everything that I wanted to say.
Okay.
One more very brief point is that coming back to the inheritance laws, people have to understand that Islam is a complete way of life for a person. Number one, it's not a way of life that can be imposed upon anyone else. That's one of the founding principles of it. You have to enter into it of your own free volition. Number two, the matter of inheritance, as far as I'm concerned, if I was to tally it up monetarily, it makes sense to me that a man who has to look after a wife, children, and all of his other extended family should get more money than his sister, who doesn't have to look after anybody. Okay, that makes sense to me from a purely logical perspective. And number two, hold on. You guys can come back to me. Number two, my absolute final point is that under secular law in this country, people can be disinherited entirely. Okay. Now this is something that nobody's mentioned. People can be disinherited entirely under secular law in the United Kingdom. However, under Islam, it is not permissible under the Sharia law, under the true Sharia law, to disinherit anybody. So that's something that should also be, let's not focus on one aspect of the law and forget about all of the others, because the law itself is a global thing. It's about an entire set of rules.
Okay, look, I'm sure we're going to probably continue discussing this afterwards, but we're going to have one.
Just around Sharia law, if I can just say, I'm a lawyer.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, we only have time for one more question.
I'm sorry, can we just listen to this lady at the back, because I did say we have her.
Oh, okay. I'll be really quick. I promise. But I think we'd all agree that that law has to be clear and unequivocal. And I think what we've proved by this debate today is that Sharia law is very subjective, and it's all about how you interpret things from the Qur'an. And I think that's not a basis for a proper law of a proper country to base all its stuff on, that anyone can interpret in a number of different ways, which we've seen tonight. Thank you very much.
Okay, so what we're going to do now, I realise this is quite a tall order because we're running out of time. I'm going to give each member of the panel 2 minutes to sum up, respond to anything they want, make any points they want, and it's going to be a pretty strict 2 minutes, and then the end. It's over. Okay, so Ayaz, you can go first. You can respond to any of the criticisms that were made or anything you really want to say, and your 2 minutes start now.
Just to start off with the comment that the young lady made in the back, that this debate has proven that Sharia law is subjective and law needs to be very clear-cut. You're absolutely correct. But what needs to be understood is when we talk about the varying interpretations of Sharia law, once again we come back to the same point, that Sharia law is misused because it is misunderstood. Sharia law is very clear-cut, and it's based on the Holy Qur'an, on the Ahadith, and on the Sunnah, as I mentioned. And based on these three primary sources, if we confine ourselves to these sources, we will see that Sharia law has always given human rights to people, and it has always fought for that same purpose. People today may do whatever they want, but that doesn't make it right. As far as separation of the state and religion is concerned, this exactly is what Islam teaches. It says, La ikraha fid din, no compulsion in religion. And why is Islam actually a secular law? Why is Sharia secularism? Because secularism stands for absolute justice. And if the Sharia is imposed on somebody who does not believe in it, then that's not justice. So effectively, what the Holy Quran teaches is that irrespective of religious background, you should give your governance to such people who you believe to be honest. So Islam teaches that democratic process should be played out in order for a state to run successfully. And that is irrespective of religion. So when we live in a democratic state, when we live in a state where everybody's voice is counted, a government for the people, by the people, from the people, this is exactly what Islam teaches. So Islam, in other words, is secularism, and secularism is absolute justice.
Thank you. Okay, maybe now we could hear from Anne-Marie.
Yeah, just on the various different interpretations and on what you described as ignoring religion. Look, we're secularists, and what we want is a secular state where you can all argue your interpretations if you want to, but none of those interpretations will become the law and therefore apply to people who don't share that interpretation. So you need a secular state with no religion in it at all. And I'm not interested in reforming Muslims. That's not my concern. What I want to do is what was done with Christianity, was push it back out of the law, make a secular space, and then Christians can continue to debate the various interpretations, but without it applying to anyone else. And as for you being offended, well, I'll tell you, I'm offended. I'm very offended by the fact that there are men in this room justifying beating up women. I'm a woman. As a woman, I'm deeply offended by it. As a graduate from law, I'm deeply offended by by the fact that you assume that I will become confused by some commercial matter, and I'm offended by the fact that there are men sitting here defending that idea as well. So we all get offended sometimes.
You've got another minute if you like, or if you're Okay, and if you'd like to go, John?
I've got 2 minutes.
2 minutes, go. Off you go.
Okay, so I'm not, if you don't mind, Anne-Marie, I'm not, I think we've already come to agreement on most of the issues you mentioned. For me, I feel like I have, but maybe, I mean, these are big issues we need to continue talking. So in many of these things, I personally feel like they've actually been resolved this evening, for me. In terms of what is true Sharia and what is a true secular state. Essentially, nobody is looking to impose any form of Islam on anybody else. I mean, many people are, but I'm not accountable for them. I'm only accountable for myself and for my belief system, which comes from the Holy Prophet of Islam, with the peace and blessings of God be upon him. I'm not accountable for a mullah, and I refuse to be, and it's not my belief. So that's with the secular state. We only want freedom. So could Sharia be imposed in the UK now? No, absolutely not. It would be completely against the Sharia to impose Sharia in the UK now. Don't worry, it should not happen. It is completely against Sharia to impose Sharia here now. There's no choice. Being excised. So it would be compulsory, wouldn't it? So let's reject it. Let's not have it. Secondly, unity within Islam. You're completely right. There is no unity in Islam at the moment. And this is one of the greatest problems for Islam. What is the truth? How do we access the truth of the message given by God? And I want, personally, that message desperately. And I would go to Adam, peace be upon him, or I'd go to Abraham, or I'd go to Moses, or I'd go to Jesus, or I'd go to Muhammad, or I'd go to Mary, or I'd go to the wife of the Pharaoh. But I can't currently access them. God bless them, rest in peace. They're now dead and gone. And may Allah have mercy on their souls. So I can't touch them. But I can get something which I believe is the blessing given to this world, which is the only solution to that very problem you've mentioned, which is the one religion which has been brought by every one of those prophets, brought again by the promised Messiah, and now the single voice is his successor, who is still alive.
Sorry.
I'll tell you more about it later.
And finally, Mariam.
I think that oftentimes in this discussion, you're told that what you say is insulting and hurtful. And Anne-Marie discussed this. And I think that's really an attempt to stop people from speaking. Can we speak? Are we allowed to speak? Are we? When we're faced with a movement that is threatening us with death, that is wreaking havoc against the world, are we allowed to say that we oppose it? And will people stop telling us that we're offending them? We're not hurting anybody. It's called freedom of expression. And freedom of expression matters only when things are important, when they have, it's something that is a taboo, that it's something that people are uncomfortable about talking about. If you wanted to sit here and exchange recipes, well, we'd get on very well, but who cares? You know, and that's the thing. In this debate, freedom of expression is key. And it's the freedom of expression of someone like Alia Magda al-Mahdi in Egypt to go nude against the Islamists, to Golnaz, who does an interview with a EU program about her situation, that she's 12 years in prison for being raped, and the EU censors it because they say they want to protect her. Well, let her speak. Stop censoring her. Stop censoring us. You know, and the other thing is, our point of meeting is the fact that, because we have Muslims in our campaign, the place that we meet is that we want secularism, not your definition of secularism, a secularism which separates religion from the state, from the law, from the educational system. We wouldn't even be discussing the verses of the Qur'an had you not brought it up. I hate going there because there's no winning that discussion. Everybody says something else. There's always some sort of justification. We never win. And I don't care. I'm an atheist. I don't care what it says in the Qur'an. You know, so in a sense, this is not an ideological battle. It's not about reforming Muslims. You do what you want to do. It's about fighting a political movement that is imposing Sharia. We need to stop it. You need to join us. I'll see you tomorrow on our campaign trail.
No, we don't agree. Right.
Well, not you. Yeah.
Look.
Well, obviously the people who agree, not the ones who support wife beating and...
I realise that there are many people that wanted to say things that'll be disappointed, but you know, there's nothing stopping you carrying on discussing this. However, we are going to have to bring an end to the formal part of the evening. Again, thank you all for coming, and thank you to our speakers who have done an excellent job, not only of introducing the topic, but also responding to the multitude of questions that you've dealt them. It only remains for me to thank you for being a relatively civilised and cooperative audience. And with that, I'm now going to hand you back over to Robbie for some closing words.
Thank you very much, Jacob. Yes, that is on. I know that this might annoy a few people, but I'm going to have to give the microphone to one person who I did actually notice had their hand up the entire time and didn't actually get asked to give his view. So there will be one more very, very quick point before we close it up.
I'm a Muslim. I'm not part of the Ahmadiyya sect, which is a complete anathema to all Muslims. What I would like to say regarding the motion is that it was very disappointing that all panelists have assumed that the secular viewpoint of human rights is the correct position to take. Just because a group of people have come together and put together a few human rights articles, we're expected to take them as the torchbearers of human rights and just believe what they say as being correct. Now, the real debate is what is the objective criteria to this secularist liberal view of human rights? And regardless of what Mr. Namazi says regarding you don't need evidence, common sense, and she brought up the example of the racial apartheid, that it was common sense that people went against it. But those who enforced the racial apartheid will say, oh, it just makes sense that, we need racial apartheid. The Nazis will say, it makes sense to kill all these Jews. The Serbs will just say, it makes sense to commit a genocide against the Bosnian Muslims. So please give an objective criteria to your rights of human rights.
Sorry, we don't actually have time to go back and forth.
Shall we naturally not answer it? It's over.
Sorry.
You can talk to him later.
His
I'm
point
sure.
of,
Stay around.
I had to let him give his point of view. He did have his hand up the entire
People who
time.
had their hands up as well. And
No,
it's not
since
fair
the
to-
beginning, since the hour started effectively.
So you should have moderated it rather than him,
Well,
possibly.
I'm sorry, but it's done now. There we go. Anyway, I would like to thank all of the speakers for their fantastic contributions to tonight's debate. And so could everyone please give a big round of applause to Jonathan, Ayaz, Anne-Marie, Mariam, and of course Jacob. Okay, and I would also like to thank the Ahmadiyya Muslim Students Association of UCL for giving us a lot of support for this event, and all the fellow members of the UCLU Atheist, Secularist and Humanist Society who helped out tonight. And of course, for all of you for taking the time out to be here. So with us this evening for this relevant, enlightening and occasionally heated debate. So have a very good evening. Thank you very much.